An incurably ill mother, a monstrous father, and a spoiled younger sister doom the family to a bleak end. Reincarnated hero Lid Bardia chose to live an honest life. He wants to change the future too. Candace stretches after a long day working at her computer, relieved to finally have a break. The girl came up to the hero and asked how he liked the Automi game she'd recommended a few days earlier. The hero found it fascinating. The mechanics turned out to be more engaging than he expected. He especially liked the free mode, which lets you write the heroine's story from scratch. The girl is happy he liked it. His constant talking makes it hard to tell if he has really been through it all. Konda confirms it. EACHIE is 33, an ordinary office worker who loves games and anime. The company pays overtime and even lets you take days off. It was nothing out of the ordinary, but he was content with this life. Other employees often go out drinking with business partners, while the hero spends the night playing games. He didn't realize his body had reached its limit. His last memory was of his mother, who had died several years earlier. The boy's eyes opened. Disoriented under an unfamiliar ceiling, he appears to have lost consciousness while waiting at a traffic light. Noticing his arms and legs were too short, he ran to the mirror and stared at his reflection, unable to recognize the person looking back. A maid rushed into the room, surprised to find Mr. Lid awake, and hurried to tell everyone. The man says the child is fine. They got very scared when he lost consciousness in the garden. Lid didn't understand who all these people were. It turned out the man was the child's servant. His name was Garn, and the hero apologized to the servants for making them worry. The maids looked surprised. The boy did not understand what was said. Garn thanked his master for his words. To them, that was too much praise. He asked the boy to call him just Garn. The young man thanked the servant. His head suddenly began to ache. It made no sense to him. Fragments of memory surfaced in his mind. Someone else's memories are inside him, so he looks like the ordinary Kanda, and Ikai at the company assumes he is Kanda, but the man realizes he is not Kanda and is actually Bardia, the lead. He plays a supporting role to the lead, Bardia, in the Odom game Tokirella, which she played, and must help the villain who is interfering with the main character. Reincarnated into the world of an Atom game, he was not merely an evil side character. Lid rang the bell for a maid. Finding out what was going on meant disturbing the servants. The maid entered and asked what had happened. Lid told her there was no need to bow and that he was just checking. A kid guessed he would be 7 this year, but the girl said he had only turned 6 last month. He asked me to tell him about the Magnolia Empire, the country of his family. It is home to beastmen, dark elves, and other races. The nobility includes neutrals, conservatives, and reformers, but the Bardi family is mostly neutral. Their father is Lanner Bardi, their mother is Nainali, and their younger sister is Meldy. They all live together, and Lanner sometimes travels to the city to handle political issues. Everything was exactly the same as in the world of Tokirel. The girl asked if the master was all right. Lid confirmed it and told her not to worry. Her expression made him think she was afraid of him. A sudden headache hit him and memories surfaced about how he had treated the servants. Lidpak had been unpredictable, and everyone had feared him, so he apologized to the girl for how he had treated her before, then asked her name and complimented her. Danae called the boy cute, but then apologized. The following morning, Tenny wakes the young master. He jumped up and blushed. The girl asked what had happened, and he replied that nothing had. Meanwhile, he thought he couldn't say he'd fallen in love with her outfit. Danae wanted to help him change, but he said he could do it himself. Lid sat at the large dining room table. The aristocratic life amazed him. He sat alone at the table for no clear reason and asked Grand where the others were. Grand said Mr. Liner was in town and Mrs. Nainali was unwell in her room. Liz decided to go check on his mother. Nainali Bardia is his mother. In the game, she didn't even have a name. He wonders what kind of character she is. He walked to the door of his mother's room. Denise suggested they come another day because the woman wasn't feeling well. The young man disagreed because he felt he hadn't seen his mother in a while. Lid can't understand why he seems forbidden from entering, as if both his body and heart are keeping him away, and Dane said Mistress Nainali wasn't feeling well, so the boy was trying to avoid meeting her. After knocking, he entered his mother's room. She sat on the bed and said she was glad Lid had come. A wave of incomprehensible feelings overwhelmed the hero. He didn't know what it was. Nanny said she was fine, then started coughing. Lid rushed to his mother. He helped her sit up. The woman said she'd heard from Garn that he'd passed out in the garden. She asked if he was sure he was okay. He reassured her that everything was fine and that he was glad to see her. Mom apologized for making him worry. Lid shook his head and said there was nothing to worry about because he was the Margrave, his father's son. They talked a bit longer, then the young man left, promising to come back. Lid traveled to Garn to learn what was wrong with Mrs. Nainali. The servant said he could not tell him that. Lid said he was asking seriously. He would not stop asking. Garin told the boy this must stay between them, since Lady Nainali was suffering from magical exhaustion and the man should not have told him. Everyone in this world has at least a small amount of life energy, known as magic power. Normally a person recovers on their own, but magical exhaustion sharply weakens natural recovery and leads to death, making the disease incurable and fatal. The hero suspected it was the disease Garn had mentioned. Takarol had a debuff called magic exhaustion. While afflicted, a character's mana slowly drains, and when mana reaches 0, their health begins to fall. A little girl appeared in the doorway, Meldy's younger sister. The girl asked what her brother was doing. He said he needed to find something and offered to help her. Meldy asked if he would be angry. The hero said he would not be and invited her over. He offered to read her a picture book. She agreed and threw herself into his arms. He asked her to close the door first. Lid read a book about princesses to his sister. The hero's memories started coming back. When Meldy was born, Lid was filled with joy. When his mother got sick, he was likely trying to protect his sanity, like any child, so he took his feelings out on others, cursing and fighting, and Meldy suffered too. After they started avoiding each other, they stopped eating breakfast together. Lid apologized to his sister, but she didn't understand why and said sleeping in the garden wasn't allowed. Realizing what she knew, the boy added that people should not pretend ignorance. She said she wasn't pretending. The hero said Melody was smart. Meldy told her brother he could call her Mel. Mother always calls her Mel, so he can call her that too because he's important to her. After reading the book, the girl fell asleep on her brother's shoulder while Lid called an A, which touched her. She lifted the girl and carried her into the room, and Garn asked whether the young man had really been with Mistress Meldy. The hero confirmed it and said he had read her books until she fell asleep. The servant thanked the boy and hoped things would continue to go well between them. Smiling, Lid said it would be so because she was his sister. Garn noticed the young man had changed a lot since he lost consciousness in the garden. The hero began to defend himself, saying he had not changed much. After the servant left, the hero wiped sweat from his brow and admitted he was scared, but he was surprised to be compared to his past self. Talking with his sister and mother made him realize what he needed to do. In Tokyoro, Lid commits a crime alongside the antagonist. After he was found guilty, he was exiled, though he could have been sent to the front lines or executed. The hero must prevent this. To avoid trial or exile, befriend the characters and avoid any actions that could lead to trial, death, or banishment. Reading his note, the hero realizes he wrote it himself, a task that feels nearly impossible. Most game characters live in the city or abroad, so his chance of meeting them is slim because he lives in the Margrave's territory and he is a minor character. To survive on his own, he must get stronger, and to do that he needs to save money. Above all, he wanted to heal his mother. Those were likely Lid's feelings when he saw her condition. His beloved mother was weakening, and there was nothing he could do. He felt his heart break but kept his pain to himself. The hero said his mother's illness had strained family relations, so he needed to restore unity, find a scientific way to avoid condemnation, and live by the law. Kondo remembers his mother's life, her last days, and her death. He refuses to go through that again. Determined to save his mother, he gathered every book he could find and began searching for information. In this world, the hero is Lid Bardia, a 6-year-old boy with matching silver hair and violet eyes. He can remember the exact contents of any book he's read and thinks he's a superbrain. Inside the book, he found something interesting. The plants and ores in this world look and are named exactly like those in the real world. Lid now knows what he must do. Garn tells the hero that Mr. Liner has returned. Bardia returns to Wama. It's his first time meeting the hero in person. Garn told him the hero wants to speak with him. Standing by the door, the young man hopes everything goes well. Entering his father's office, he apologized. The father said he heard his son faint in the garden and asked how he felt. The hero replied he was fine already. Leonard got straight to the point and asked what Lid wanted to talk about. Lid sat down and said he had 2 things to ask his father. Yes, his father wanted him to have the chance to learn magic and martial arts and to get an education, and it is unclear why the hero remembered Lid, who resembled the character from the game. With training he can change, that's just who he is. In free mode, unlocked after completing the game, the lead can learn all types of magic, which can come in handy. His starting stats are very weak and take time to raise, and almost no one will help him, but he got pulled into the grind and learned to use lead. Liner said he'd been thinking about it for a while, but put it off because of his mental state, and asked his son if he was sure about it. Lid says it was hard to see his mother so sick, yet he realized the suffering had to end and wanted to help her himself. Smiling, the father said they would find him a teacher and then asked about the second request. A young man wanted money to spend as he wished. His father asked what he needed it for. The young man said he had some ideas and wanted to make them real. Lid asked his father to invest in him without any paperwork, and the hero called it a gamble. Preparing the paperwork would take too long, so he decided to bet on enthusiasm. Relenting, the father said he would give him a certain amount, though it would be too much for a child, and hoped he had a plan. Lid jumped up from his chair, confirmed it, and thanked his father. He then said he had one more request. He suggested they make a promise with Mel. He worried they were not spending enough time together. Liner said he'd think about it, and asked whether Meldy had actually given him permission to call her that. The hero confirmed it. The children sit at the dinner table. A father asks his daughter if he can call her Mel, and she panics. Silence filled the room. Meldy said he could not, and allowed only her mother and brother. Father looked upset but did not show it. Lid said he wanted to explore the grounds today. Father agreed and ordered Garn to prepare the carriage. 2 knights will guard the hero, a girl named Diana and a boy named Lubins. Bardia lies far from the city, so it is called the border. It has ample open space for industrial development. Watching the olive tree, the young man assumed growing olives was his father's idea. Diana said they will arrive soon. The hero thinks they didn't come here to have fun. There are things in this city they want to spend money on. This isn't just a village, it's the largest city in the area. They stepped into the square, and the knights warned the young man not to stray far from them because the city was crowded. Lid agreed. Moments later, they were standing by a building, and Diana asked if this was really the place. The man confirmed, and they entered Christie's Chamber of Commerce, where a girl with cat ears greeted them and offered to recommend something. After Lid said he had recently sent a letter, the girl realized he was the host's guest and went to confirm it. An elf stepped forward, apologized for keeping them waiting, and introduced herself as Christy Saffron, a representative of the Christie Chamber of Commerce. Christy Saffron is the only elf here. Everything is exactly as Garn described. The girl invited them into the reception area. The elf and the boy traded polite greetings. The girl asked whether the hero was sure it was best to leave guards outside the doors. Lid agreed and said he wanted everything they talked about to stay secret. He suggested getting to the main point and asked her what she knew about lotion and conditioner. A few days ago, the hero learned aloe vera exists in this world. He asked whether aloe vera lotion was available. Danae, passing by, asked what aloe vera lotion was. Lid was surprised they didn't use it after washing their faces. He asked if they took care of their skin. The girl did not understand what skin care meant. He assumed these things were obvious. In this world, they were unknown. Danae admitted she hadn't even thought about it and asked how he knew. The hero said he thought it would be nice if such a thing existed. Aloe is growing in their garden. Lid said it can heal wounds. The maid was surprised that such a nasty weed could do that. An olive field, ample land, skincare and luxury, and a new product for aristocrats. That's what it takes. The hero immediately began creating samples. After watching a video to pass the time, he first tried making a lotion, then asked if they had a quote conditioner and made a sample from olives. Christy said she had never heard of it before. If such a thing existed, Christy would know, but for now it was only an idea. Inside, the hero rejoiced. Everything was as he thought, and now something could come of it. Lid pulled out the jars and said he'd brought everything. She was surprised to see he already had samples. She asked if she could try it. The hero approved. Removing her gloves, she applied the product to her hand. A moment later, she felt inspired and said things were much better. She said she'd long suffered from dry skin and thought a product like this was only a pipe dream, but she told Mr. Lid it would sell well, which delighted him. Inspired, Chris said they had to turn it into a product. The hero told her to try the conditioner. After their conversation, they began planning their next steps. The hero wants to create personal assets and must find lute grass and moon grass to make a cure for magical exhaustion syndrome. As the young man spoke, Christina felt frightened. When the letter arrived, it was hard to believe a child would start a conversation about trade. After leaving the Saffron family's Chamber of Commerce to open her own, she hadn't expected to listen to the ravings of the Margrave's son. Seeing her boss in a good mood, Emma said they would soon have a lot of work. Lubins asked whether everything had worked out for the gentleman. Lid replied that Christy was glad to hear him out. They were now on friendly terms with the Chamber of Commerce. There was no time to relax. Sitting idle would lead to a terrible future. There was no time to hesitate. He had to earn money and start a new life. Suddenly, he noticed someone. A girl looked around, and the young man assumed she was lost. He stepped closer and asked if she was okay. She shuddered. A young man introduced himself and offered help, saying she looked like she needed it. She said she was lost and could not find her guide. Lid asked where they had separated and offered to help her. After a while, a guide was found. Grateful, the girl thanked the hero for saving her mistress. He said she did not need to bow. It was clear the girls needed help. The stranger blushed, and Diana and Lubins looked surprised. The conductor tells the princess she is glad she is okay. Still, the girl stays silent. Thoughts of that boy stayed with her. She said she should have learned his name. The conductor suggested the girl had fallen in love. Meanwhile, Lupin asks Mr. Lit whether he is sure he shouldn't have found out the girl's name. Still, the hero said nothing and slept on Diana's shoulder. They smiled at the turn of events and decided to return to the mansion. He was told that Mrs. Sandra, his teacher, had come to see him. She introduced herself and said she would teach him magic. Sandra Anust was Lita's magic teacher, and they exchanged greetings. The hero was waiting for this. Apparently, Lid could use all kinds of magic. The girl asked if he had ever used magic. The young man said he had never used it and had only read about it in books. The teacher explains that to use magic, they must convert their life force into magical energy, and only after that can they use magic, so their first step is to learn how to make that conversion. It's not that simple, but she'll explain how, and the young man can count on her. Lid realized she loved magic from the way she behaved. Sandra said it would be easier to demonstrate magic in person and suggested going to the training building. Standing in the center of the room, the girl told the young man to look. She called forth the magic ball fireball. She then asked the hero for his opinion, and the young gentleman's eyes lit up with delight. He ran to the girl and told her she had cool magic. Lita's actions moved her, but she composed herself immediately, remembering she was a teacher. She told him that if you keep a clear image of the magic in your head, you can use it without casting a spell, and then she showed him. They won't learn this right away. First, they need to learn to use their magic power. The young man began to act. He failed. Lid doesn't understand why. He assumes he lacks talent, and Sandra knows he's failing. She shared a tip for transferring magic power and asked the hero to try it. He agreed and stepped closer. The girl asked him to place his hand in hers. Channeling magic into the hero's body, she made him scream as if he were being torn apart, but Sandra said not to worry because no one had ever been torn apart before. A young man feels something ripping his insides out through his hands, and the sensation is very strange. Although the hero feels uncomfortable, the girl asks him to wait a moment, and Lid thinks she's doing it on purpose and is only joking. A moment later, Sandra let the boy go and said she was done. Lid thought it had only been torture. Apologizing, the teacher explained she had just forced some of her magic into the boy. Controlling magic independently takes a lot of practice. If someone else forces him to experience the translation, it will take much less time, but will hurt a little. Looking at her, the young man thought she should have been told this earlier. With a smile, Sandra said that discussing things in advance was not at all interesting. She suggested they try translating the magical power again. Something stirred inside the hero. He had already sensed the source of the magical power. Now that source had to be turned into magic. He must picture the compression, which will make him feel something extraordinary. The boy's body suddenly began to glow, and Sandra smiled, calling it magical power and telling him to channel it into his fists. She tells him to remember the fireball she showed him. To use it, he must picture the magic in his mind. Once he has that image, he must say the spell's name at the target and cast it. Lid focused, gathering his magical power into his fists, as teacher Sandra had shown him. He needed to form a ball and aim it at the target. The hero cast fireball magic and it worked, surprising the teacher. Delighted, Lid ran to the girl, who stayed silent. She said she didn't expect him to make so much progress with magic in one day. Learning to translate magical power does not make someone familiar with magic right away. Memorizing the image takes a lot of effort. Smiling, Sandra said Mr. Lita had a vivid imagination and might be a genius. The hero made several more fireballs, and each one hit the target. Using them without the spell still worked. Sandra kept calling Lid a genius. The young man felt unwell. His magic power had faded, and a lecture was coming up. Lid must have overdone it. Everyone is born with the same amount of magical power, and the more you use it, the more it grows. A young man asked whether lost magical power could be restored. At present, there is only one method. Many countries are trying to develop a restoration potion. So far, no one has succeeded. Lid realizes these aren't the same recovery potions from the game. Teacher Sandra explained the magical elements and special magic. To cast a fireball, you must convert magical power into fire and water. This technique provides the same supporting role as forced transfer of magical power. She said magic is not that simple. You can even make your own magic. The young man was surprised. Sandra said the hero was just beginning to learn. He needed to get used to the power of magic. Lid believes he has become stronger. Lubens noticed the gentleman's odd movements and asked what they were. The young man said it was just a warm-up. Lubens asked whether the knight exercised, and the knight said he ran but did not make those odd movements. He knows there is no such thing as a warm-up in this world. Confused, he remembered Knight Lubens had taught him martial arts today, but since he had hardly exercised in his past life, he lacked confidence and had to avoid physical activity to change the future. First, the hero takes a stance, then swings. He's quite good at it, and Lubens suggests he practice. The knight told the young man to strike wherever he chose. The leader rushed into the attack. They are sparring. He doesn't understand what is happening to him. He felt light. Swinging a wooden sword was great fun. Leader's high physical abilities are the reason, and he seems capable of anything. Lubin said that was all for today, and added that he could even become better than Mr. Liner. Lidon likes praise but has never won, so he wonders what he can do to change that. Asking the knight how long he and Diana have been friends, he hears they live near each other and have been friends since childhood. The hero thought he liked her. Lubin blushed and started to justify himself. The boys' faces flushed. They say maids and knights cannot rise in rank because Lubens is a coward who refuses to admit his feelings. Knight sank to the floor and pulled his knees up to his chest. Lid feared he had gone too far, so when he saw Diana he called her over. Diana asked what had happened. Lubin sat on the ground, dejected. Mentioning the knight had been odd, and that she sometimes got upset over small things, she asked what the master had told him. Turning away, the hero mentioned to Lubens that he had been afraid of her. The young man assumed it had affected her too, leaving him with a strange unease. Angry, Diana said she would find out every detail from him. The girl hit her friend on the head. Lubens asked what she was doing there. She asked if they were done with training. That night made it clear. Then the girl said she needed to speak with Mr. Led about. He didn't mind. Diana moved to the top of Lid's list of people he shouldn't anger, and Lid realized he shouldn't joke about other people's feelings. Lid reads a story to Meldy as they sit in their mother's room, and she watches. Mel said her brother is a great reader, and listening to him read lines is very interesting. Lid believes this is the right tone. He's glad Mel is happy, but lately she gets angry when he reads without changing his voice. Noli had no idea her son had such a talent. He is a natural actor. Mel said she taught him and asked her mother to praise her too. She stroked her daughter's head. My mother feels better today, but her complexion still looks off. There is no natural cure for the magical exhaustion syndrome she has. Not all members of the Batidia family know this. Litz said that was all for today. When Mel asked why, Litz replied that they had a guest and had said goodbye to his mother and sister. It turned out the guests were Christy. She said the product launch was near. After donated the loathing and conditioner, he and Chris met several more times. Alone, he couldn't manage production, but with Chris's help it became possible. Lid said Chris's skills surprised him. She replied it was all because of his assets. Now we only need to increase production volumes. We also need to teach people how to use products and care for their health. The girl didn't understand what caring for her health meant. Lid thought about explaining different skin types, like sensitive, oily, and dry, and Chris was surprised he even knew that. Preventing counterfeit products is important. We must stop making fake products that can harm people's health. Offer customer service as a countermeasure. Explain how the product works when customers buy it and allow returns if it is unsuitable. Also use a brand logo such as the Bardia family crest. Third, we're partnering with other stores and will distribute the product through both the Christie's Chamber of Commerce and the Saffron Chamber of Commerce. Christie was also chosen to be the face of the advertising campaign. She was surprised to learn this. The hero said she was ideal for the role. He asks Chris to take on the most important task of presenting him to the Magnolia Empire. A few days later, Liner suggests that if the goods are that good, they could be presented to their majesties. When he goes to the capital, Lid plans to ask the chamber representative Christie to accompany his father. His father was surprised it wasn't him. The young man said he was too young to say which part of a woman's body shows her beauty and that he would not sound convincing, but he believed she would be perfect because her elegance was unique to her. The lead suggests some men will find Chris so beautiful they will want to give her to their wives and daughters as a gift. The boy's father was shocked to learn a 6-year-old could really talk, and after confirming it, he agreed to go to the city with a Chamber of Commerce representative. Chris admitted she wasn't very confident but would try her best, then suddenly remembered something. She pulled out the moon herb, one of the healing herbs the young man asked her to find. Using it can slow down the mother's illness. He started to cry. Lid thanked Chris, and Chris told him to keep his spirits up. Only the lute grass remains, but he still can't find it and must wait. A few days later, Father went to the city with Chris to present a gift to their majesties. Bardia grows the plants used for lotions and conditioners, and the Chamber of Commerce handles processing, production, and packaging. After retiring from developing skincare products, the hero will next create a restoration potion made from moongrass. Even if a full cure is out of reach, treatment can stabilize the disease until a miracle cure is found, but the hero lacks pharmaceutical knowledge. Garn recommended asking Mrs. Sandra. The teacher asked him what he wanted to find out. Lid said it was about the grass, but Sandra did not understand what kind of grass Lid meant. Lid said this herb restores magical power. Sandra jumped up at the receipt. It surprised her that moongrass existed. Apologizing for speaking so loudly, she said she'd been to the Imperial Laboratory earlier, where they'd been studying a magic power restoration potion, and Lid was surprised by the coincidence. Then Sandra told him about her business in the city. The city gathered elite mages to develop a potion to restore magical power, and Sandra, who had long loved magic and made notable contributions to its study, was appointed head of the laboratory. The goods sent last week still have not arrived. We've seen this before. Development is behind schedule again. We have no choice but to change the cooking method. They should have finished the report by now, and she's getting worried. Out of the blue, she ran into an unfamiliar woman she had never seen in the palace. She said it's restless here because all kinds of mice are running around. She asked the lead developer how the process works. Sandra believes some aristocrats dislike them. The aristocrats object to large sums being sent to unknown recipients for unknown purposes. When they saw no results, people began leaving and the lab became short-staffed. Sandra took charge, then left the lab. Fearing her resignation would spark a scandal, she cut ties with her family. People condemned the girl and her actions, accused her of failing to carry out a state order, and said she deserved nothing but execution or exile. When everyone was beginning to forget her, Margrave Liner hired her as a teacher. That's how she ended up here. Lid believes she was in serious trouble, and he will have to force her to redo the same research. He wants to save his family, so he asks the teacher for help. He keeps it secret. His mother has magic exhaustion syndrome, and there is no cure yet, so he plans to brew a potion to restore her magic and extend her life, even if only a little. The hero needs Sandra's powers and asks her to help make a magic power restoration potion. She thought this was the way to repay the Margrave for hiring her. If she was right for him, she promised to help and to do everything to save Lady Nenali. Lid took her hand and thanked her. He promised to set up Sandra's lab and take care of anything else she might need, which thrilled her. While in the city, she found the moongrass but could never obtain it. The lab had no information at all about the moongrass. She told him he could just call her Sandra, but in class he should call her teacher Sandra. The young man agreed, and they both laughed. Lita wonders how his father is getting along with Chris. Back in the city, Chris was inside the palace. The woman said the lotion and conditioner were simply amazing and asked Chris to sell the recipe and the rights to the Magnolia Empire. Chris sent a mental message to Mr. Lid. Liner and Christie, while they paused en route to the capital, her father said they'd arrive soon and asked if she was ready. She confirmed it, saying it rarely happens to her, but she would do everything she could. He warned her to stay on her guard and be more careful with her words and actions. The capital was terrifying, and next to it even a Margrave like him was a speck of dust. Emma said she had already seen the capital. Looking at the view, Chris said she admires it every time. The city is a fortress. Magnolia's imperial capital is surrounded by two walls. The aristocrats live inside the palace walls, which are about 5 meters high. Beyond them lies the ordinary city, protected by an outer wall. Emma said even the Elven Kingdom wasn't that big. Mr. Liner had already ridden ahead, but they had been standing there for a long time. The guards asked to see their offerings. The Liner put his hand on the knight's shoulder and said he trusted these women. The guards let them pass. The warrior they just saw is Count Larat's ward, and the Count has been encroaching on their rights. The man said he probably wanted information about the goods. Chris warned him to be careful. Liner called the lack of explanation a zone fault and said he did not know this could happen during an interrogation. Count Lyra suddenly appeared and said he hadn't expected to see him there. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. He asked who the woman behind him was, and she said her name was Christy Saffron. He accused her of being a hooligan who fled the Saffron Chamber of Commerce. Rumors circulated about her, but they were unconfirmed. Next, he turned to Emma. According to him, they were genuinely friends with the animals. Calling beastmen animals is an insult. He says it deliberately to anger Chris. Christy clenched her fists and prepared to speak, refusing to let anyone insult Emma. Margrave Lanner stepped in before she could act and said it was too much. They had come for an audience with their majesties, so insulting them was foolish. After agreeing and apologizing, he left and said he had business to attend to. Sitting in the reception area, the girls asked who it was. The Margraver replied that it was Laurent Galliano. Laurent Galliano adores money. Emma went to Miss Chris and apologized for causing trouble. Christy hugged Emma and told her she wasn't to blame. Christie's chambers blacklisted Count Lara. The liner assured them there was no need to worry. Their majesties were ordinary people with common sense. A maid entered the room and said she would show them the way. The hero says all the nobles have gathered in the audience hall, and the newcomer asks if they've kept everyone waiting. Featuring Empress Matilda Magnolia and Emperor Erwin Magnolia. Lena Bardia announces that he has arrived at the palace. He apologizes to his companion for always having to travel so far. She says she is Baron Martin Saffron's daughter from the Kingdom of Astolia. The girl gives her name as Christy Saffron. Laner is surprised to hear she is with the Chamber of Commerce rather than being a baron's daughter. Christy explains her father only recently received the title. Liner says that because she is a nobleman's daughter, he treated her improperly, and his interlocutor is shocked. The women whisper that she was more than just a girl from the Chamber of Commerce. The Empress wants to try the goods as soon as possible, and the Emperor asks to be introduced. Christy says she delivered it to them and shows them the goods. The young man observes that the men show no interest, while the Empress and the maids are very interested. Smiling, Christy says she uses this lotion and conditioner herself. The Empress asks to touch Christy's hair, and Christy agrees. Surprised, the Empress says it's the first time she has seen hair this smooth and shiny. According to her, only women can appreciate the value of that hair. Christy suggests she try the lotion. A man approaches the king and asks for forgiveness, warning it could be dangerous. She stresses that she's speaking with Christy, and the Empress coldly asks Count Elar when she last asked his opinion. Christy says the lotion eases dryness. The Empress asks whether Christy intends to bribe all the ladies in the palace. Delighted, the Empress is ready to call this product the best. The Emperor says the lotion is amazing, offers to sell Christy the recipe, and writes it to the Magnolia Empire. Someone asks Mrs. Christy whether she can hear. The girl says she cannot accept the offer. She explains the decision is not hers to make alone. The Emperor insists that Margrave Lanar, as a vassal, cannot refuse the offer. Christy despairs over Mr. Liner, screaming that she can't do anything. Mr. Lid appears and tells them to rely on him. He says their Chamber of Commerce took a risk releasing this product. If they try to take away their rights, they should leave the area. Instead, he gives His Majesty the right to receive the goods first. The Empress says they will do their best to keep the goods in stock and asks them to forgive her. The Empress replies calmly that it will be so. The courtier asks anxiously whether Your Majesty is certain. The woman agrees with Christy, saying that removing people's rights will destroy the empire, and those rights must be reconsidered. The Emperor agrees and promises to enforce citizens' rights more strictly, reserving production rights for Christy. The man asks whether everyone agrees. The courtiers bow and answer in agreement. Christy is surprised, reflecting on how suddenly everything began to fall into place. A sudden idea hits her, and she suspects it might all be a setup. Christy realizes the Empress wasn't after production or rights, but wanted to get lotion and conditioner. Christy believed the Empress could not simply give the order, because that would be an abuse of power, so the Empress forced Christy to promise it to her personally. Christy's pride is wounded. She feels like a speck of dust next to the Empire and realizes she has only been dancing to the Empress's tune. Later, seated in a chair, Christy admits she is very tired. Liner serves her tea and praises her. Liner reminds her that he told her to be careful. The servant announces that their majesties have come to see them, and Christy and her maid are shocked. The Emperor and Empress enter the room and apologize for arriving without warning and for not greeting everyone properly. The Empress apologizes to Christy for being forced to take part in this and then explains what happened today. Margrave Liner had already delivered samples to their majesties, and the product was so astonishing that rumors began to spread. Some aristocrats sought the rights to this valuable gift from the territory of Bardia. Now that the chance to renegotiate the aristocrats' rights has come up, she calls the day productive, and Christy says everything is fine. Since Chris got the production rights, the aristocrats won't be able to get them easily. The emperor says he needs to speak with Liner, while the ladies decide to summarize their conversation. The empress goes straight to the question of who gets the goods first, and Christie is surprised by the haste. The emperor tells Liner that someone from another country has approached him about marriage, and this has caused a problem. Speaking to Liner, he says there is no one better suited to this marriage than his son. The narrator feels a strange sensation, as if something is leaving him and a crack has opened at the bottom of the glass. She says the illness started suddenly. At first she felt tired, then she could no longer stand. Lying in bed and growing weak, she wondered whether she could do anything to help her body. You should start to feel that the disease has stopped progressing. She slept badly, Lyd began snapping at others, and Mel began crying more often. She worries that the disease is eating away at her children's hearts. The mother notices that recently Lyd has begun acting differently and talking like an adult. Mel happily says her brother read a book to her. Mother understands that Lyd's behavior has improved, and she also cannot give up. Determined, she believes she can overcome this disease. Lyd lies on the grass, shading his eyes with his hand, and says how nice the weather is. Seeing how hard Daddy and Chris are trying, he wants to be useful too. He decides to try attribute magic, like in the game. Lyd realizes this universe is almost the same as Tokyorella, the game he played in a past life. After getting the necessary materials, the young man created personal care products he could not make in the game, and he understands his life could be completely different here. Having already checked the fire, he'll move on to the other attributes. Forming a wall of ice, he says he managed to do it. The lead is choosing attribute names and wants vivid, easy-to-visualize options like Fire Spear or Thunder Spear. He shouts the spell's name decisively, Fire Spear. Admiringly, Lyd says it is wonderful. Mel cries out with delight. Lyd freezes in horror as she realizes she saw everything. Mel says she has been watching since he first summoned the light. Let's ask Mel to keep their magic a secret. Mel is captivated by the beauty of magic, and Lyd promises to read any book Mel wants. He's worried that if everyone finds out, rumors will spread. Mel asks him to show the magic again. A few days later, Chris sent a letter asking whether they had succeeded. The letter says Count Laurent is banned from entry and warns that Empress Matilda is dangerous. Lyd finds it odd and is puzzled why the unknown count was suddenly denied entry. The teacher announces that classes will start soon and explains that attribute magic requires a specific aptitude. The woman asks whether special talents are needed for special magic. Lyd admits he does not know. The teacher praises him and says he does not need anything. Lyd looks surprised and asks whether that means anyone can use it. She explains that magic must be made by the person or given by someone else, and Lyd is pleased that it can be made. Lyd asks if it's the same special magic. The teacher agrees but says a clearer image and stronger magic are needed, or nothing will work. The teacher explains that only the magic's creator can pass it on, and that both people must have immense magical power for the transfer to happen. Lyd concludes the magic won't activate without enough power or an image, and the teacher confirms this. The teacher says Moongrass can restore magical power. Lyd wonders what will happen when it is used. Grateful, she thanks Lyd, forgets her uniform, shouts that she'll make samples and study on her own, then runs off. Lyd realizes that original magic requires magical power and wonders how much of it he has. He wonders if there is magic or a tool that can measure how much of it there is. A young man says the rain is pouring down and decides he must hurry back. He apologizes for getting wet. The maids worry Mr. Lyd will catch a cold and fuss over him. The hero tries to calm them down, but they refuse. They remember his fall in the garden and insist he needs to be warmed up. Lyd soaks in the bath, saying it's been a long time since his last bath and how good it feels. Baths are rare here. People usually just dry off with a hot towel, so he didn't expect a bath in his own room. He wonders how much water such an occasion uses. The hero realizes the numerical standards in this world are the same as in his past. He's getting ready to run an experiment. Lyd says he filled a liter vessel with water made by magic. He emptied it, refilled it, and repeated this several times. The young man decides to call it 1 liter. Now he says he can do it, and next time he will try 10 times. The lead repeats it again and again, increasing the count because he believes it will help him concentrate. About using magical power. A relieved sigh escapes him as he announces the final number, 980. Lyd explains that because a fixed amount of power is used for 1 liter of magic, he has more than 980 magical power. The new magic is called Magic Power Measurement. Effect measures magical power as a numerical value. deciding he must try to measure magical power. The hero stands in front of the vessel on the stump and confirms that nothing happened. The young man says he heard it in his head, then tries again and says, measurement of magical power. Lid heard it again. The magic power reading was 60. This made him realize using the dimension required 20 units of magic power. He happily says he succeeded. The hero believes the measurement will help when he asks his mother to drink the potion. That way he can see the result. Today he says he is one step closer to his goal. The teacher asks him to repeat his question. Lid explains he wanted to know how much magical power was being consumed, so he created a special spell for magical power measurement. The teacher is taken aback by his way of thinking. She can't understand how he came up with it. He walks Sandra through the creation process. Drawing on measurements of water, he created a spell for 1 liter and then hypothesized about the numerical values. Sandra admits that such an idea never occurred to her. Addressing Lid, she says pushily that it just turned out that way. Lid spots her odd reaction and warns that if this magic spreads, he will be sent to the imperial capital. The hero is shocked. He didn't realize how serious it was. Sandra suggests discussing it with ordinary people in mind. Lid is baffled that everyone has magical powers, and she explains most people don't know how to use magic or get even the most basic training. Despite being a fantasy world, magic doesn't seem to be used in battles, by the army, by adventurers, or during exploration. Lid understands why he didn't see many mages in the mansion. Most people avoid studying things they find tedious. He's disappointed that in a fantasy world magic isn't around every corner and thinks it's a waste. Even Sandra says she couldn't create a spell for exactly 1 liter and that it wouldn't be easy. She believes only a genius could do it. Convinced Reed is more talented than she first thought, she now suspects he may be a greater genius than she is. Lid thinks that if he's a genius, teacher Sandra should have been invited to the capital long ago. She says that's why she was chosen as director of the Capital Research Institute. She says someone else's envy crushed her, but insists she was invited to the capital as a genius. Smiling, Lid says he expected something like this from Sandra's teacher. She admits she had been eager for this day to observe her talented student and research subject. The woman urges him not to let boundaries hold him back and says that if you stand out too much, no one will push you away. Lid says he understands, but for now he'll keep it to himself, even though she could have warned him sooner. He says she thought it would be more interesting this way. She confirms that is exactly the reason. Lydia, noticing she's scaring him, laughs and says he's too easy to read. The narrator says they continued working on a drug to restore magical power. Sandra shows them their materials moongrass. They will experiment with different forms, eating it raw, powdered, and boiled. Lid knows moon grass is much better, and he's willing to try it for his mother's sake. The hero vows to do everything. You think about everything he ate. Experiment results show the raw herb stores 20 strength, and comments note it is very bitter. When cooked, the results vary from 10 to 30 units, and people complain it has gotten worse. The bitterness has grown stronger, and he has to eat it all. As a powder, the recovery is 50 units. Reed says the easiest way to take it was mixed with water, though it still wasn't very tasty. Reed concludes the last option is the best. Sandra says it's the method of administration. Sandra suggests rolling the powder around in his mouth, and Reed mentally calls her the devil. The woman concludes that powder tablets would be best for Ms. Nainali. She praises Reed, who has become very ill. Reed realizes tearfully that they have succeeded in creating a drug that restores magical power. It looked like Sandra was having fun, pressing him to say it tasted good and insisting she put love into it. Flushed with embarrassment and anger, the hero tells the teacher he will not forget this. Sandra says he'll understand everything tomorrow. Reed feels uneasy about it. She gives him a hint, you can ask Mrs. Meldy anything. Reed announces his return to Mel with joy, and Mel greets him just as happily. Startled, he calls her name after spotting something unusual. Mel pulls away from him and shouts that he stinks. Hiding behind the maid, she says he smells bad and insists he is not her brother. Reed is stunned and confused and realizes no one is coming toward him. The butler holds his nose and admits he smells. Here, just go take a bath. Reed apologizes and Sandra, cursing in her head, rushes to the bathroom. Knights are shown exercising while counting. Reed explains the knights were doing drills. The captain called it impressive, but Reuben still feels sick from the grass. He yells at him not to shirk, even though the exercises have got harder. Reed thinks Rubens is a talented knight. Reed recalls that Rubens was the first to recognize the importance of exercise, but Rubens never expected it to go this far. Rubens sneaks up on Reed and tells him not to relax, saying Reed would have died in the fight. A man announces that a dungeon has appeared where Reed can now train, and Reed is delighted. Rubens explains a dungeon is considered a type of living creature, a place with monsters, materials, and leveling. He continues that the dungeon core gathers magical energy underground, creating monsters and treasures. People killed by those monsters become food for the dungeon. The hero warns that if the dungeon isn't cleared, the monsters will escape into the outside world, so the knights and adventurers take charge. He says the only way to destroy them is to destroy their core, but that would make everything collapse, so the knights just patrol and watch over them. Reed compares it to an anthill, with the queen as the center and the monsters as the workers. The young man is curious about the Adventurers Guild, and Rubens explains they serve as general laborers and that guilds can be public or private. He outlines the guild system in detail. Freelance adventurers accept these requests. Local adventurers mainly collect items. Reed wants to register too. Rubens praises his swordsmanship and predicts he'll be great at clearing dungeons. The young man hopes that by then Rubens will be married to Diana. Rubens asks sheepishly that this not be mentioned. Reed can't understand his uncertainty because Diana would reciprocate. Rubens explains it's because Reed doesn't like getting up in the morning. He says Diana always comes to wake him, but she will not do it forever because one day she will have a husband. When she makes him breakfast, she says it's not for him, just practice for the wedding. When her parents hint, she replies that Rubens is just a friend. He says he can't seem to please this girl. After thinking about what he heard, Reed concludes that Diana is a real tsundere. Reed reminds Rubens of their childhood promise. Reed urges Rubens to definitely go on a date with Diana. Rubens is stunned and can't understand why he made that decision so suddenly. Reed urges a knight not to hesitate. Advising Rubens, he asks her to consider the true meaning of her words. Rubens repeats the true meaning to himself thoughtfully. Reed is pleased he had a good idea. Rubens says he understands everything. Mel asks her brother why he's laughing. He thinks it's all too complicated and says it's better not to tell anyone else yet. Diana remembers how they used to play here. The girl asks what he wanted. He calls her shyly. He read reports and later heard they had finally started dating. Looking out the window, the hero wishes they would marry right away. Mel wakes her brother cheerfully, calling out that it's already morning, and Reed, still sleepy, answers with a quiet good morning. The notes say Mel has been waking him in the mornings lately. He used to be the first one up, and she resented not being able to wake him. Returning to her studies after breakfast, she prepares for the future by learning etiquette, languages, and dance. Reed knows mornings are a special time to spend with her beloved brother, since she's only 4 and very active. Remembering Mel waking him, the hero hears his father announce he's back. Reed greets his father and Chris happily. Chris, clearly tired, quietly says his name. The young man asks Chris if she is okay. Father explains that Her Majesty enjoyed chatting with Chris, then tells her to sleep in the guest room and summons Reed to his study for a talk. The man appears very serious. Reed does not understand what is happening. In the office, the father sits across from his son and asks Reed directly why he has changed so suddenly. The father observed that Reed stayed calm under pressure and was clearly doing mature rather than childish work. He says this applies to gifts too, insists the mansion has no books with that knowledge, and demands an explanation. Reed is at a loss. He didn't expect his father to pressure him like this and doesn't know what to say, but it's getting harder to keep lying to his father. He decides to speak honestly. Carefully choosing his words, the young man begins his story and says that on that day in the garden he lost consciousness and remembered his past life. His past life memories merged with Reed's memories, creating a new him built on his past life personality while Reed's feelings remained. He explains Reed felt guilty for his sister, who was a handmaiden. He always respected his father and wanted to be just as strong. The hero was overwhelmed with despair because he could not help his dying mother. This is why he wants to protect his family, including his mother. Father calls for reading. The man apologizes and says he was just watching and had no idea, thinking Reed was doing it all for himself. He admits he has failed as a father, and Reed replies tearfully that his father noticed the changes in him. Reed asks his father whether he believes the story. His father says it explains everything, and the boy adds he made the drug using knowledge from a past life. Reed reveals it is a drug that restores magical power. Father is stunned by the discovery. The young man explains he brought the materials and Sandra built it. then created a special spell to measure its power, leaving the father shocked by everything, including the moonflowers and Sandra's involvement. Her father says the drug is only a temporary fix for Nainali and will extend her life without curing her. The man asks whether Reed learned this in a past life, if he knows anything else, and promises to help. He asks Haroon to join their discussion. The father says he wanted to talk about something else. Father announces he has chosen a bride for Reed. I'm not sure he needs to propose, but father says everything is decided and the engagement will take place in a couple of months. Father admits he was surprised when His Majesty brought up the issue unexpectedly. When he protests that he is too young for marriage, his father explains it is a political marriage to Princess Renelute to strengthen their alliance. Reed realizes they're still just kids. Father tells Haroon to get ready to meet the princess at the mansion. A rude note says the mansion is too small for the princess, and he suggests building a new residence that respects cultural differences. The father agrees and tells Haroon to prepare the plans, promising government funding. Reed asks his father why a princess from another kingdom would marry him when his family is of lower status. Father says it's simple. The kingdom of Renelute is ruled by dark elves. The man points to a map showing Renelute bordering their lands and notes a conflict between the human and dark elf kingdoms called the Barsta Incident. Father says the people of Barst hunted the dark elves and that soured relations and broke off trade ties. After the Magnolia Empire provided aid and imposed a ban on workers, Renelute became its vassal while keeping its autonomy. Eventually, everyone was released. The father warns that marrying the emperor's son would be risky because it could spark a struggle for the throne, so they proposed marriage to an aristocrat. Reed realizes their remote Margraviate is the perfect place to exile the princess. Father insists Reed, as the son of an imperial aristocrat, has no right to refuse, even though he tried to object to His Majesty. Reed feels sorry for the princess because, as a vassal, she is forced to marry the Margrave's son. His father tells him to become the kind of husband who will value her above all else. He asks if Reed can make the princess betrayed by fate happy and says everything depends on him. His father tells him to protect her like his own princess. Reed replies, his eyes steady with determination, that he understands everything. The young man asks for her name. The father replies that she is the first princess, Farah Renelute. Reed silently repeats the name of his future wife, Farah Reno. Reed later said he told his father he wanted to take part in the design, so he asked permission to visit the kingdom of Renelute. He says he can't fully explain it, but it's connected to his past life and might help treat his mother. The father agrees to a visit for only a few days, saying there's time before the marriage announcement and he'll arrange an unofficial visit. Reed is thinking about getting married at 6. Haroon speaks to him then. Haroon says he is confident Reed will make the princess happy, and Reed thanks him, saying he will do his best. He's still a child, and Reed says calling her a young wife isn't quite right. Haru apologizes, and Reed cheerfully says it's no big deal. Reed goes to the guest room and calls Chris. He thinks she may be asleep and quietly peeks in. He enters the room and quietly calls Chris's name. The hero realizes she must be very tired. The young man watches Chris asleep and thinks she is beautiful. Chris mumbles anxiously in her sleep, clearly having a nightmare about the Empress. Reed feels awkward walking in. He tries to get out, but the door won't open. Panic sets in as he thinks someone is holding the door from the other side. The young man hears Mel say she will not let him go and is shocked to learn that she is his sister. Mel scolds him for coming in without permission. Reed says he only wanted to check on her and pleads with his sister to open the door. The girl keeps teasing him. Reed, panicked, asks her to hurry before Chris wakes up. Chris wakes up and apologizes for nodding off from fatigue. Reed feels relieved, thinking he wasn't caught. He apologizes for what happened in the capital. Chris has already told him everything about the Count, the negotiations, and how she was kept in the dark too. She also described how rudely Count Roland had treated her. The Emperor offered to punish him, but Chris, to the Count's surprise, refused. In the throne room, Chris told the Emperor she had something to say, and he let her speak. She urged the nobles to ignore rumors and judge by evidence so their country would not be discredited in diplomatic circles. She urged them to take this chance to reflect and fix their mistakes. Apologizing to her, the Emperor asked her to forgive his aristocracy for their lack of education. The problem hit more than Roland. It hit the whole aristocracy, who was reprimanded. Reed says it was far more serious than he expected. Reed admires her and thinks she is a great woman. Chris asks him what he said again, but Reed says she misheard. The young man asks if they now just have to wait and watch Roland. Chris says his faction has already lost its position and influence. Chris says Roland did not get the title of Count by chance. Reed realizes they needed to defeat the enemy to expand their trade. Reed says he is pleased with the successful negotiations and grateful that Christie's company came to Bardia, and he thanks them. Chris replies that she's honored to hear that and says she's very lucky to have met him. She keeps thinking about not being recognized, no matter how hard she tried. Nothing she did made a difference. Chris was born into a trading company where her older brother was destined to be the heir, but her business sense was far stronger. She said she'd support her brother from behind the scenes, and she did until people started talking. Chris's track record made her the clear choice to inherit the company. Worried the company might collapse amid controversy, she chose to go independent. Even the most talented person finds starting from scratch in an unfamiliar land extremely hard. Some days she made no progress. Suddenly, everything changed. She believes talent alone sometimes fails without luck, yet she has fought and tried desperately because luck favors those who work hard. Reed says his butler told him about her company and credits everything he learned about her to her own efforts. He points out Chris has achieved a lot and asks where her confidence is. Looking back on how hard she worked, she knows it was often incredibly hard and that she probably always wanted someone to notice her. She's so glad this day has come. Chris apologizes for losing her head. Reed reassures her and asks if His Majesty will work with her now. Chris confirms and lists the terms. Prepare a 1-month supply with full prepayment, and this does not apply to additional orders. She says the allowed growing is just beginning, but she has already taken steps and asked her father to find fertilizer. Reed admires her sharp business sense. Using her connections, she secured a contract and placed orders that drove up aloe's market price. The young man sees the Empress will have her hands full. Chris says he's good at advertising and even managed to win over the Empress. Chris says only a few people in the world are as handsome as he is, and she sheepishly tells him to choose his words more carefully. Reed offers her a catchy slogan, saying she can be as beautiful as Chris, and Chris agrees sheepishly. After a long discussion, the hero says he persuaded her to name the products Christy Lotion and Christy Emma Hair Dye. Chris is surprised to learn that paint can be made not only from olive oils, but also from essential oils. Reed thinks she will not stop at Justice products, and he believes they will continue to evolve. Chris urges them to stay optimistic. Reed notes they can now deal directly with Her Majesty. Reed remembers hearing Chris mutter in her sleep that Empress Matilda was dangerous. Noticing she even talks about Her Majesty in her sleep, he smiles and advises her to avoid the Empress. Chris is puzzled about how he knows her dream. Reed replies innocently that he heard it while she slept. She shouts that looking at a sleeping girl's face is the height of indecency. Mel, eavesdropping behind the door, misunderstood everything and is ready to defend Mr. Reed's honor. Meanwhile, Nally lies in bed. Her heart races as she listens to the drip of water. Crying, she whispers no, she will not give up. Determined, the woman looks ahead and vows she will get back on her feet. Convincing herself everything is fine, the Nolly tries to gather her strength. A knock sounds at the door. Nolly lets them in and says it's open. Liner, Reed, and Sandra enter. Sandra greets them politely and wishes them a good day. Apologizing for her appearance, Nolly Bardia sits in bed and introduces herself as the Margrave's wife. Reed admires how generous his mother is. Sandra introduces herself and says she works in magical research. Standing beside the bed, Liner admits he kept the name of the illness from her until now because he was too afraid. What keeps you from living a normal life? This is a fatal, incurable disorder that drains magical power. Nolly replies calmly that she knew. A horrified Liner asks who told her. She tells her husband not to make that face and says she already knew about her condition. She simply didn't like being just sick. Knowing her mother had long since accepted her illness, she cried. Reed apologizes for bringing up her painful memories. Nolly says she's a useless mother. The hero says that because his mother is useless, his father, who called himself bad, is useless too, and that he simply repeated what he said. Liner is furious about his son's secrecy, and Nolly asks him to call Maldy simply Mel. The boy screams and asks if he thought about his mother. He asks his son how hard he thinks it was for her to go through all of this alone. The man admits he knew the disease was fatal, so he looked away and buried himself in work. He regrets leaving her alone. Liner admits his mistake, and Nolly reassures him that she understood he had other concerns. The man tells her he loves her. Nolly replies she loves him too. Sandra cuts them off and tells them to get down to business. Handing Nanali the drug, she explains it will not cure her but will ease her symptoms. Reed warns it tastes unpleasant and recommends washing it down with water immediately. Nanali goes pale as everyone rushes to her in a panic. Terrified, Reed thinks things are going badly. He screams while casting the Measure magical power spell. Natalie has only 8 units of magic power left, and Reed yells at Sandra to give Natalie the medicine quickly. Sandra cries out her name in horror as Nanali coughs up blood. Trying to get the door open, the girl tried shouting to the woman to open it. Shivering and drooling, she breathed hard and managed to call out to Rainer once. The boy tried to encourage his mother to keep going no matter what. With a weary expression, she looked at her son as he screamed in terror and called for her because he didn't want her to abandon him. A man burst into the room and kissed the woman, and the boy had not expected it. The young man met Nanali while still an assistant to Arvin and was working in the capital at the time. To avoid detection, he even had to disguise himself, and in a conversation with Arvin, he asked whether it was necessary to go into town for a routine census. The man was in disguise, wearing a wig, and when his friend asked, he said he just wanted to go for a walk. 2 reasons explained it. One was that he wanted to buy his wife a gift. The man frowned at that excuse. Arvin was outraged by his friend's actions. It would have been fine to send a servant or to ask Arvin to do it, but he wanted to decide for himself. The friend had to give in to the unstoppable man, and he smiled. Later, he explained his father had been ill and was struggling to manage government affairs, and the young man asked if things were really that bad. The matter was serious. In a couple of years, Arvin would inherit his father's business and would likely lose the chance to travel to the city. That's why the young man wanted to see the landscapes I would later defend. Instead, he told his friend not to worry about his problems and thanked him for going to the city with him. On the bridge, the friends heard screams from below. Someone was begging to be let go. The man asked his friend if he could go over and check. Arvind agreed but asked him not to overdo it. As he ran away, the young man asked Dinas to stay with his master. A circle of men surrounded the young woman, and one of them did not expect to see her in a place like that. He took her hand to keep the conversation going. She said the man had already been formally rejected, so there was nothing to discuss, and refused to talk to someone with such an inflated ego. He refused to back down. Cruel grins spread across his face and those of his friends. The girl began to feel genuinely frightened. He liked the look on her face. The man said the carriage would arrive soon, and for every moment she made him uncomfortable, the woman now had to pay. He pressed hard on her chin, squeezing it until she tried to call for help. A young man's voice came from behind the crowd, asking what they were doing. A stranger covered the woman's mouth with his hand, while his companion explained they were lovers meeting in secret. But the man who came to help was wiser and asked the woman herself. She only needed to hint whether these men were bothering her. Then she bit the hand holding her, shouted that none of them were her mate, and asked for help. The guy didn't need anything else. He already understood it all. The young man handled the crowd of hooligans quickly, and not wanting to talk, asked them to leave. As they fled, Logos from Count Galliano's family vowed to remember them. The man turned to the woman and asked if she was hurt, but she began to stutter. She thanked him for saving her, since she had been screaming and no one hurried to help. She couldn't take it anymore and broke down crying from the stress and fear she'd endured. He patted her back and praised her for holding up well. Arvin and Dinis approached them, worried that he might not be okay. The man reprimanded the bodyguard for calling his name so loudly since they were there in secret, and the woman admired her savior and found him handsome. A couple of months later, Rainer received an unexpected notification that someone had proposed to him. The friend added that his parents weren't against the marriage, but the man refused to believe it because it seemed impossible, and it was the first time he'd heard of it. Arvin Helden has written approval from his family. After reading the letter, the boy scratched the back of his head, sure it was written in his father's handwriting. The bride proved to be the Crimson Lady Nanali Ranamis, who had turned down all suitors and was said to be stunningly beautiful. Rainer remained unconvinced because he had never seen her. When the young man arrived at the estate, he was surprised to learn the girl he had recently helped had become his bride. She was relieved he remembered her because she had thought they'd never meet again. Rainer suddenly realized the girl was beautiful, something he had missed the last time they met. He finally understood why people called her the Crimson Lady. Confused, Nanali asked him what he meant by that. Rainer gave more details. The woman had striking red hair and was clearly a lovely person, which puzzled the girl. She suddenly apologized and said she got the nickname when a man proposed, and she refused sharply, and he never recovered. After that incident, people called Nainali a difficult, unapproachable girl that no one could win over, and she blushed deeply as she told it while the young man listened and understood, though he had intended the nickname to mean something else. A smile suddenly lit her face because she loved the special meaning the young man had given the nickname and even began to like it. Rainer told Nainali he really liked her. To avoid dragging things out, he said he wanted her to marry him and move with him to Bardia. The woman believed that if he did not oppose her, it would bring her only joy. Nainali took the drug. The girl asked Mr. Reed how much magic there was. The boy responded quickly and began repeating the phrase power measurement under his breath, mentally pleading that everything would be all right. Rainer suddenly answered for him. His wife had 101 units of magical power left. Delighted, the child told Sandra they had succeeded. Then he turned to his mother as the girl called for her mistress, and Nainali opened her eyes and looked at her son. She gave him that same radiant smile and told the boy she was all right. He could not bear it any longer and burst into loud cries. After that, a doctor examined Nainali and reassured the family that another attack was unlikely, and they discussed the situation and decided to prescribe medication 3 times a day while also stationing maids nearby to watch over their mistress. The drug impressed Reed, restoring a full 100 units of his magical power with 1 dose. Santa believed Rainer was responsible for this. When Nainali could not open her mouth to take the medicine, the man acted quickly, putting water and the medicine into his mouth and then, with a kiss, passing them to her. The boy was pleased at how quickly his father found his bearings and really thought him a wonderful person, and then he asked the girl if she had any free time, but she was surprised that Reed did not want to spend it with his family. The child turned, saw his parents looking happy together, and decided to give them some time alone. Norris approached His Majesty and asked if he had read the letter, insisting their country had been completely disrespected, that marriages should have been with the royal family or at least with equal nobility, and that the empire showed its low regard by ignoring their demands and deciding everything unilaterally. So she had to marry the Margrave's son, and they were the same age. The king told the man everything had already been decided. They could not influence the marriage because they could not bring themselves to say they disliked their future husband. Everything could become much easier if the empire caused some problems. Hearing that, the elf's face broke into an ominous smile. The aristocrat decided they should test whether the Margrave's son had any real talent. Norris offered to handle it, and His Majesty explained exactly what he wanted. The man explained his plan and, with a mysterious expression, asked what the king thought of it. Sandra was pleased that the boy understood his parents' wishes. Looking at him, she told him she felt an adult was hiding inside the child's body. Reed laughed because she knew that could not be true. Remembering he wanted to consult his girlfriend because she would be nearby when he created a new spell, he also knew she was frightened and did not know his plan. He wanted to create a spell called Remember. A stranger once told the boy that once something entered the brain, it could never be forgotten. It stayed buried deep in his memory. Now he has been reborn and still carries memories from his past life. In other words, memory lives not just in the brain, but also in the soul. Reed considered a way to see those soul memories. Sandra said it was like the so-called theory of the living soul. The man asked again, showing he wanted a detailed answer. She believed it was one of the Torii in the science of magic. The theory's basis was largely similar to their thinking. Reed understood it all, but considered it just one of the world's philosophies. The boy wondered whether this could help. The theory held that life force was the source of magical power and showed the path to divinity. In short, as Reed had said earlier, it was this soul that sparked the child's idea that changing the soul could affect magical power, but even if they tried, no one could predict the result. Reed sat in a meditative position and folded his hands into a circle. If the source of magical power was the soul or life force, he needed to focus on something deep inside his body. After some time concentrating, the boy felt no change but kept going, since the magic had to become vital energy and he wanted to know where it would go, so he focused on sensing its flow. Immersed in the sensations, he realized the power was reaching somewhere. He opened his eyes and decided it looked like a hole that could be dangerous. Reed suddenly found himself somewhere else, standing before rows of bookshelves. A voice spoke, greeting him. A child, a spitting image of him, sat at the table in front of him, smiling kindly, and the boy decided to ask who he was. The copy hesitated, then suggested calling itself Memory, which seemed the most fitting. The image embodied Reed's past because he had come to dig into the memories of his previous life, and the hero wondered if he would really cooperate so easily. The image suggested he extract the memories himself. It felt like searching social networks, so the child had to cope. He closed his eyes and pictured the network. It didn't seem hard, but he had to keep his focus. Most people could not reach this place, but Reed was different. The image told him to speak to it directly, saying memory could find any information in the world. The boy wondered how to summon it, and Reed said to use magic. Then the image wanted the hero to follow its advice. Although he reached it this time, the place was fragile and dangerous, so the memory asked Reed not to return. The image reminded him again that if necessary the hero could call him by name. The boy agreed and thanked him. Gradually he began to come to his senses, and Sandra called out to him anxiously. The surprise startled the hero, making him step back and scare the girl too. When he asked what she was doing, Sandra thought he should have been asking someone else. Her friend said the boy had frozen and stayed completely silent, and when she came closer he screamed. Read the piece titled Apologize for the Disruption. She stood up and brushed herself off, concerned that his body might not be okay since he had been sitting motionless for a long time. Staring at his hands, he remembered that the last thing his memory had warned him was not to return. That world had been so fragile, he could have been trapped there forever. Reed paused before telling Sandra about it. When she asked, he said nothing had worked. Sandra looked surprised and apologized that she couldn't help. Sitting on the bed, the child suddenly made up his mind and searched his memory. He appeared almost immediately, greeted him, and said he was surprised at how quickly he had returned. Reed was delighted to hear him at last. The image looked indignant. The boy had not believed him before. He asked what he was looking for, but the child only wanted to test this method of communication. Then the memory asked to be called the next time help was needed and vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The boy went to visit his mother, and as soon as he entered the room, he asked how she was. Happy, the woman told her son she felt better than before thanks to the medication and asked the assistant to confirm, and the assistant said they were still working on the dosage, but there had been no problems. The hero looked at the pair and compared them to two cats. Sandra noticed this and immediately realized he had thought something offensive about them. He quickly defended himself, saying it was the other way around. When Nanel was close to a fatal seizure, the girl became her attending physician. Having long researched magical power, she was the perfect choice. Reed had also taught her how to measure power. Determined to finish a cure for his mother as soon as possible, the boy believed that success would let him help her and others with the disease. A hand suddenly touched his cheek. The woman pulled him out of his thoughts. His son looked very tense. He reassured her he was just thinking, and she asked him not to push himself too hard. Sandra told the gentleman it was time to go to his father, who had called, and as they parted, Nanali went to greet Rainer. The man suddenly announced that the trip date was set, and the boy looked noticeably nervous. Reed planned to travel to Renelute to treat his mother. He needed a large amount of moongrass for the medicine, but it would not grow in their territory. That was the main reason for the trip. Renelute had a developed agricultural sector, and Reed hoped to find a solution there. Memories from his past life told him he could find the information he needed there. Rainer warned his son not to let their guard down. Something was clearly brewing in the country. The young man did not understand what his father meant. He explained that King Elias wanted to promote friendship between their countries, and all the aristocrats agreed with him. Solemnly, the son asked who these aristocrats were. Rainer thought they might all belong to his son's fiancée's faction, and his son soon realized this meant there would be nobles who considered him an unsuitable husband. The local aristocrats' feelings were understandable. They resented their vassal status and wanted independence for their country, but if that went too far, it would be dangerous. Reed wondered how his father knew all this. Rainer believed no wall was impenetrable. Information could be obtained from any country, and that was what was needed to protect one's home. Rainer's spies in Renelute surprised the son. The man thought it was a good guess but said nothing. The boy would have preferred to stay unaware. The king understood Norris's point of view, but the girl's future father-in-law, Rainer Bardia, was called the strongest man in the Magnolia Empire, and his lands lay almost on the border with their country, which made the match ideal. Aristocrat Norris Tamusuka saw the sense in his words, but they wanted to marry into the imperial family and would not accept any fallback option. Others at the meeting agreed with him. Norris was always a character. He was especially proud to be a dark elf, and a whole faction of patriots had rallied around him. He planned to settle in another country through marriage. First, Renelute would stop being a vassal, and then he would take full control of the empire. Rhesus entered and apologized. The man asked what the elf wanted. The elf had come to ask about Farah. Was it true they planned to send her away as a hostage and force her into marriage? The father brushed it off, unsure who could have spread such nonsense, but apparently it was Norris. The boy grew angry because no one had told him, but the girl was only 6, so she could not be sent to a foreign country. Racists began shouting, unable to see why it was necessary. The king said it was important to keep ties with the country of Magnolia so the boy would understand his father's decision when he became king. Still, the young prince refused to accept it. The man frowned and forced himself to stay calm. His son was still young and overly emotional. He sent him back to his room to cool off and gather his thoughts, and he shouldn't have brought this up. The boy hurried down the corridor, not even noticing the people nearby. Farah greeted her brother loudly, surprising him because she rarely came there, and said her mother had invited her and that she was curious how he had ended up there. The brother described a conversation with his father when he lost his temper and his father got angry. Pharaoh was stunned, unable to believe the king was angry. When he looked at his sister Risa, he thought she was very beautiful, like their mother, and though young she was well educated and every movement was refined and elegant. She was his little sister, and the young prince was proud of her. The attendant told the princess it was time to go, so she said goodbye to her brother. Watching his sister leave, the prince again felt sure his father's actions were wrong. The young prince was resolved to protect his little sister. Reading Heldas's head, he could not make sense of those memories. Memory is a special magic the boy invented just the other day to delve into his memories. Recalling an image in his mind let him find the information he needed. As he spoke with the image, the magic slowly faded. The hero wondered why he had angered that memory so deeply. Meanwhile, he kept questioning it about the plot. Memory couldn't understand what the boy wanted because he kept skipping the dialogue. Now, even if Memory searched his memories, he could only find fragments of information. Reed wasn't paying much attention to the plot because the game was so absorbing and he was focused on something else. That's why the young man needed help. It was an automated Cinderella-style game where the love interests were princes from different countries. One of them was supposed to be a man named Racist in Renelute. Even so, it was very hard. In that case, Reed wanted to take the chance to learn more about his memory. The image agreed. He planned to tell her himself. The boy could only recall things he had consciously seen or heard in his past life, like videos he watched online, school textbook material, coworkers' complaints, boring ads, conversations he overheard from pastors, and similar things. The comparison felt odd, like piecing together a torn document. Memory could try, but it still waited for precise instructions. The hero asked in disbelief whether he could request such a thing. During training, the teacher asked the gentleman to watch his movements carefully, but the boy found it difficult. Collapsing onto the grass, he was utterly exhausted. Suddenly, the man said it was time to learn how to strengthen his body with magic. Converting magical power boosts combat skill, but without proper technique, it's nearly useless. Reed had to imagine his body stronger, and although he didn't fully understand, his teacher said merely channeling mania through him would not work. He had to feel magic flow through every muscle. At night, people were often told to feel rather than do, meaning muscles, not heads. After the boy learned the trick, he stopped running out of breath so quickly. He had to remember that rule. The young man suddenly realized Rubens kept using the same move against him. The man never tired during long training sessions because he had inexhaustible stamina, unlike his student, who quickly ran out of energy, so Reed had no chance of winning. He threatened the teacher, saying that once he learned body strengthening, he would definitely defeat him. Rubens accepted the challenge, but first he had to learn how to distribute magical power. Then the man led him to an obstacle course. The hero began to feel his fatigue easing, and the man was pleased with the speed of his absorption. His training with Sandra likely helped, and the major warriors were impressive. Reed admired Rubens' abilities. If he had those abilities, he would have become a true genius. The teacher encouraged him because success was just around the corner. The man was surprised the young man had managed the training without building his strength. When it was time to move to the next stage, the boy pushed himself to the limit without tiring and began running with his magical power coursing through his body. He practiced the exercises without interrupting the magic flow, and once he had mastered every technique, it was time to face Rubens in a duel. They fought fiercely, and the hero promised his teacher things would change, but Rubens refused to give up since he had not lost yet, and after strengthening, his body training became much more enjoyable, and Reed felt far less tired. Despite differences in experience, height, and weight, they still had a chance to win, but not in a fair fight. Determination rose in the boy's heart, but as he hesitated, the weapon was knocked from his hand. There was still a chance. He needed to use his advantages as a child to avoid the attack. The move didn't work. A man grabbed him from behind. The idea was good, but the execution was poor, so we lost. The teacher praised the student for not giving up after their sword clash, and said the student's technique would work against less capable fighters. The young man demanded another round, but it was time to finish, so the man made clear that he was the one who had to finish. Next, Red needed a special teacher, and they had grown too used to each other. The boy realized it and grew afraid. It seemed this was only the beginning, which he could hardly believe after how tough the earlier training had been. A man suddenly approached them and apologized for the delay, saying he had to finish the work. Rainer arrived at the training ground, and Rubens told him they were done. The boy was surprised to see his father. Because the father wanted to see his son's abilities in person, he fought at full strength, and the hero did not expect his first opponent after his teacher to be his own parent. Inside, a sudden urge grew to test how much stronger Rainer was than his child. The boy rearmed himself, charged forward, and struck first. The father quickly defended himself, admired his child's strength at such a young age, and suspecting the child had absorbed the enhancement, even joked that he was starting to feel afraid. Clearly the man was stronger. The boy struggled to parry his blows and soon grew exhausted. Rainer tried to provoke him, taunting that his end had come too quickly. After that, he decided to attack, but his son found it increasingly hard to bear. Reed lost his blade, but he still had his fists and planned to use them. His father was surprised that he wanted to keep fighting after the sword's flood. The boy sank to his knees, growing more and more tired even though he could have fought Rubens longer. Rainer wanted to know how brave his son was, but his son did not fully understand, so the father asked if he knew what courage was, and the son said it was steady fortitude, a fair definition that depended on how one understood it. Reed's father promised he'd get to feel this in real combat. Courage decided whether a man lived or died. To test his son, Rainer pulled out a real saber. The man checked the blade and found it in good condition, but the boy startled him and asked why his father needed a real blade, and he chuckled, telling him to think of it as training. He then told Reed to listen carefully, stand straight and still without looking away, and watch his movements. At last the moment to begin arrived, and the hero grew nervous. A strange unease washed over Reed, as his father's aura seemed to intimidate him. Rainer swung his sword, aiming each strike straight at his son. Tears streamed down the boy's face as he closed his eyes and fell back in fear. The blade stopped, and the father watched it in silence. Later, the man confirmed that he really was his age. He ordered Reed to stand up, puzzled that he had closed his eyes after being told not to look away. The hero apologized after feeling the intent to kill for the first time, and he feared a real sword. The boy felt his father was really going to kill him, even though he knew he would. His father reassured him that everyone felt that way at first. That fear would have to be overcome later for him to gain courage, and if he did not, he would remain gripped by terror and quickly perish. Living without fear was impossible because it would lead to recklessness. Reed had to learn to control his senses, and Rainer had come specifically to teach him. Then the man smiled and asked the boy if he would mind teaching him everything again. Rubens explained the gentleman's methods were unique and said he would not be able to help if something happened. Then the teacher wished him luck. Reed's father was about to swing again, so Reed had to keep his eyes open and watch his movements closely. When the blade moved toward him, he shut his eyes again. A sword felt like it could hit him at any moment. He was scared and shaking all over, but he knew it was necessary to improve his chances of surviving in battle. I kept telling myself not to close my eyes and to keep watching the sword. Reed looked straight ahead and started tracking his father's blade. The weapon missed, stopping just a few inches from the hero's face while he stared without fear. Rainer was pleased his son was already getting used to it. Rubens came next, and the boy understood this was not the end. The mandra will form a line, then Reed must go past it to reach Rubens, while he continues attacking the whole time. He added that this should not be a problem for the young man if he watched his movements carefully. Understanding everything left him with no other choice. The teacher clenched his fist tighter and silently wished his student good luck. The hero stepped forward as his father swung his weapon. The boy kept moving, the blade so close he couldn't help but fear. Thanks to the first lesson, his eyes had already adjusted, giving him a chance to win. The top priority was to keep an eye on the sword. The boy suddenly called to the teacher, holding out his arms for a hug, and the man extended his hand as well. The child jumped straight into Rubens' arms. Tears filled the man's eyes as he praised the young master's success. Reed found his father's fencing ruthless, and before his training, he had only practiced with wooden swords. Rainer announced the end of the training session and said he would try to join every session. They ran this exact training every time. The boy was stunned. Rubens told the boy what his father would probably not say himself, and he was glad to train together because the man had long wanted to run the exercise, while Reed understood everything and looked delighted. The father, as always, couldn't show his feelings. Someone suddenly called Reed's name, so Reed turned and saw a girl walking toward them with a woman beside her, and he asked Mel what was going on. The sister puffed out her cheeks in displeasure. She started scolding her dad for torturing her brother. The maid chose to explain everything herself. Mrs. Maldy was eager to see her brother, but with training underway, she could only watch from the sidelines. Grabbing the boy's arm, the girl pulled him along and said the training was over. Later, the hero told his sister his father had done it on purpose to make him tougher, so she should not have said those things. Despite her hatred, Mel understood and agreed. Alone, the man suffered because his daughter hated him. Then the door opened and a girl entered, and the father was frightened by the surprise. She went to her father to explain herself, made clear she felt no hatred toward him, and asked for his forgiveness. The girl told the maid about her task, and the maid praised her. Rainer covered his eyes with his hand, still feeling hurt. Mel asked her brother to come back soon, and he asked him to look after everything he had left for her. Rainer stood quietly to the side and watched the children. The boy decided to push his sister towards him. His daughter suddenly came over and hugged him. She asked him to come back quickly. His heart melted, and he held the girl in his arms and promised one leg would be with them and the other would be there. Maldi was delighted by the promise. Sandra said she could take full care of Nainali. The girl reminded Reed about magic, but he already knew everything. From the window, she watched the preparations unfold. Rubens said it was time to head to Renelute. As Reed rode to the countryside in a carriage, two monsters met in the evil forest east of Renelute. A small glob of slime was about to slip into the hole beneath the tree. A massive evil snake monster crawled out from there without warning. Slime never expected to find a green snake there. Caught off guard, she feared being eaten and dying. As the monster charged, a cat appeared and struck the reptile. Confused, the slime watched as the suddenly appeared beast destroyed the green snake. Then he began to eat the flesh, which surprised her. Slime admired the black cat's coolness. It also wondered where such a monstrous slime had come from. In that monster-filled forest, this species was the most common and was at the bottom of the food chain. Normally, the slime gathered magic and then split to reproduce, but this specimen already had a lot inside, and for some reason it wasn't splitting. The huge power within this body gave rise to a kind of emotion. Dragons and other monsters killed the slime's allies, and one slime grew afraid as it watched. Forced to live in constant fear of those stronger than her, she separated from the others, and the slime decided that if she stayed in plain sight, she would be eaten. The monster lived peacefully in hiding until the green snake, its natural enemy, found it. The black cat tried to ask why the slime was following him, but there was no answer, so he turned and saw it creeping away. The beast let her in, assuming that if left to her own devices the slime would be eaten, and the cat would not be able to sleep normally. So began the strange cohabitation of the slime and the black cat. He let her live nearby, and when water was scarce, he simply drank it. The beast returned with food, and on entering the hole, found that the slime had brought order everywhere. She tried and then swallowed the leftover food and bones, which surprised the cat. As a thank you for cleaning, he gave her a leg to eat. He hadn't brought the meat on purpose. The cat curled up, proud, watching his companion eat. Black cats didn't clean well, so he let her stay in the burrow even though it needed cleaning. The beast then made sure his words were understood. After that, the black cat hunted while the slime cleaned, and that was how they lived. They could not speak the same language, but they still understood each other. They woke the black cat from a peaceful sleep because it was time to go hunting. Sleepily, he said he'd go when he was hungry. It soon dawned on him that it was slime, and he was stunned. She was also surprised he could hear her voice. It was clearly magic. The slime was unusual. The cat had never heard of anything like it, and she was surprised but pleased. All through their time together, the slime wanted to talk to him. The cat thought the slime's longing for her had triggered that change, and that's how the slime gained the ability. The slime perked up, hoping it could someday take a form like its neighbor, and the cat liked the idea, even dreaming it would become his sweet wife. Slime would pray for this every day. Slime and the black cat kept living together and got along so well that people began to say it was too much. The forest was dangerous, so he tricked me and led her to a safer place with fewer monsters. Slime asked who was in charge there, but her neighbor drove them all away. Finally, they arrived. The slime said it wanted to show him something and began to change. Suddenly, the neighbor became a white cat. The black cat froze, then she asked how the result had turned out after trying to create sulfur fur, but only making it white. The beast thought the change was perfect. Then he added that she was really sweet. At that moment, the slime reminded him of the promise he'd made. He remembered wanting her to be his wife if he transformed. The cat flattened her ears, annoyed that he didn't remember. He suddenly insisted he hadn't forgotten anything. The cat wondered whether his race or his appearance attracted him to this creature. The slime had learned magic to take on a form like his. It had worked so hard for him. Something touched the black cat, and he turned to his neighbor. Yes, the cat would become his wife, and they would live their whole lives together, as tears welled up in the slime's eyes. Again the cat asked whether he minded. She was clearly happy but still slim. He said confidently he would not repeat himself because he meant it, so she should agree. Slime cried harder, clung to the cat, and confessed her feelings. In the forest of evil, an unlikely love grew between a slime and a cat. Then they will meet a human child who will sense a strange power. That will be a completely different story. The Balsha family's expedition to Renelute included Reed, Rayner, Rubens, Diana, and the Knights. The Christie Merchant Guild traveled with them to establish trade with the country, and they continued their journey safely. The group stopped at a rest point halfway through the trip. The boy became seasick and had never imagined a wagon ride could be so unbearable. His father joked that the boy had now received his baptism of fire. Wanting to rest first, the boy entered the room and immediately fell onto the bed. Summoning his memory, the youth felt it respond immediately and thought he would be called soon. The hero asked how the search for the memories he'd requested was going. The answer was not encouraging. Nothing worthwhile had been found yet. Reed did not give up and believed there had to be something, like a clue, a name, or a conversation about where they were headed. The country's prince, Ressus, lived in Renelute. The memory also said his sprite from the game showed up, and Reed wanted to see it. They showed him what the prince looked like, and he thought the prince was cool. Black hair, yellow eyes, the dark elf tan, everything looked right. If they ever met him, they had to remember him. Judging by Reese's gaze, he might be at sunder. Becoming the half-brother of such a creature was not the most pleasant thing. The boy thanked his memory for helping him find him. A knock came at the door, and when the boy opened it, he saw an elf girl who apologized for disturbing him while he rested. Chris extended her hand and offered him some lozenges she had made from medicinal herbs because she often suffered from motion sickness. The boy was delighted that the elf had worked so hard for him. He considered her a goddess, and the girl added that she always carried them and hoped he would like them. Reed thanked her friend and promised to begin promoting her with all her might. Already visible up ahead was the Renelute outpost. One detail in Flutitiariale had nothing to do with the plot, but sparked a lot of discussion among players. That detail turned out to be the Dark Elves. At the sight of them, it seemed as if East and West were packed into a single bottle, which delighted the hero even more. The locals were a mixed bag. Some wore kimonos, while others wore Western-style clothes, like Japan after the Meiji Restoration. Reiner said it began after the Baralsto incident, when Renelute allied with Magnolia and began adopting its culture. It was a great opportunity to broaden his horizons. Eagerly, the boy asked his father to look. Rice fields lay nearby. The man chuckled. In their country you rarely see them, but here they are common. After reading this, he decided to ask Chris to set up trade to bring rice to the lands of Baldia. A huge castle loomed ahead, and inside its walls those who opposed his marriage to the princess were already waiting, so the boy braced himself and kept watch. After the ride, lids stretched a little. The maids announced they had arrived at the guest house where the hero would be staying and went to call the person in charge. When the boy arrived in Renelute, a dark elf greeted him and introduced himself as Zach Riverton, the manor's manager and guest escort. Liner told the elf they were counting on him and told Lid that the man had already helped them during the information exchange between the capital and Renelute. Zach, however, thought he was only being used as a carrier pigeon. The manager told the guest the mansion was decorated in a Magnolia-inspired style and had hot springs. Lid called it a paradise. Once in his room, he lay down on the bed. He was relieved they had finally arrived. Diana entered dressed as a maid. The boy asked why she was dressed like that. The girl said that while they were in Renelute, she would serve as the master's bodyguard and servant, and told the boy not to hesitate to ask her for help. Reed said he would rely on her, and asked whether a knight could really fight in such attire. The girl lifted the hem of her dress to show the weapon at her hip, and told her master not to worry. Diana kept revealing what she had hidden under her dress. Reed stopped her and said he had figured it out. She asked whether he was sure. The hero asked Diana why she carried so many hidden weapons. Knights normally did not use such weapons, he said. Diana agreed. She said men and women are built differently, and you can't always reach the podium in a head-to-head fight. For Diana, carrying a concealed weapon made up for the strength gap when facing men. The girl was willing to do anything to join a knightly order. Reed asked if she had gone to all that trouble for Rubens. Diana smiled, said that could be true, and remembered little Rubens. The girl suddenly protested that she was doing it mainly for herself. Diana reminded him that during Renelute she would be his master servant and asked for his favor. Ordered to stay in the hero's room, the knight asked to be named heir. Reed thought she was still too noticeable, and he planned to get some sleep, telling her to wake him if anything happened. That night someone entered the princess's room and announced that the Balsha family had arrived at the guest mansion. Assigning someone to escort the princess who was to marry the Prince of Magnolia became a way to get rid of unwanted people, and when she was sent to the groom's country, her personal guard went with her. The knight understood immediately when her father suggested the task. She assumed her brothers, jealous of her skill, had complained about her. Sometimes she felt resentful but did nothing. For 12-year-old Asna Landmark, the most important thing was honing his skills to become the princess's sword. The woman yelled at the girl because the corner of her right hand was too soft, reminding her that as a princess she had to understand her role. After the girl apologized, the woman kept shouting that a princess should be a role model and that mistakes were unacceptable. Asna tried to stop the teacher's outburst. The girl felt the word was too harsh for the princess. The woman replied it was an order from His Majesty and Lady Eltia and told the knight to speak up if he had any objection. She told the girl that her inattention had wasted their time. The princess apologized again. The lesson lasted from morning until evening. Besides teaching Renelute, she studied the Magnolia Estate's culture, the government, and the aristocratic lands. Asna realized the rumors that the princess would marry into the empire were true, and people had told her Farah had been living like this before Asna became her bodyguard, so as they spent more time together, Asna began to want to support her. As Asna and Farah got ready for bed, the knight seemed to ask if the princess was comfortable. The girl said she was already used to it and thanked the bodyguard for his concern. Farah said she needed to be patient and keep trying. The girl admitted that being ignored by her parents made her sad and caused her to cry. Asna hugged the princess. Farah remembered her mother saying her future fiancé would be the Prince of Magnolia and warning her not to get attached to the Margrave's son. Until now, Farah's mother had chosen what she wore and ate, and though she had no control over her life, Farah wanted to decide for herself what to do with this man. She remembered slipping away to the Baltic lands to take in Magnolia's atmosphere before the wedding, and the princess was thrilled to see the world for the first time. She wondered whether the boy who had helped her back then still lived in that country and hoped he was doing well and that they would meet someday. Read the exam in the girl's painting. He described the work as beautiful and skillful. Zach asked if he liked the painting. The boy replied that it showed a very beautiful woman. Diana said the young man was a romantic. Reed denied it, saying he was only admiring her. The mansion manager explained the painting showed Lady Elphia, Lord Elias' concubine. He added the woman was Princess Farah's mother. The boy felt embarrassed at the thought of falling for his future wife's mother. Reed said the daughter looked a lot like her mother. Zach said then he would appreciate his bride. Reed asked whether Zach opposed his marriage to the princess. Zach replied he had no right to object and only wanted Farah to be happy. The hero understood. He knew Renelute House felt mixed about Balsha. His father had told him that His Majesty Elias supported their union. Knowing he needed the manager's support, the boy apologized for raising the issue. Reed said that if the princess looked like the portrait, it could be called love at first sight, and he asked whether the man would support him. Zach Bood said he would be happy to support them. The hero captured the moment the manager gave the message and thanked him. A man stepped forward and declared his son was the true future. The father asked if the boy had done anything wrong, and the manager said Reed had asked him to back his romance with the princess while understanding Renelute's politics and his own position. The father muttered that his son needed more self-control. Zach said he fully supported Reed. The steward was a blood relative of the king's concubine Elphia and was the current head of House Riverton. They were also allies of Reynolds. Zach secretly led Renelute's intelligence agency, received orders directly from the king, and was close to Elias, so Lane felt reassured that his son had such support, and the men carried on talking about the upcoming audience with the king and Norris' actions. The dark elf approached Rises and apologized for the intrusion. Norisa reported that everything was going according to plan. The boy thanked him for the news. The man, however, felt he should be the one grateful, since his master had accepted his offer, and now he could be of use to him. Rises asked if father had visited Lady Eltia's again. Norris muttered that the king had shown no concern for Lady Liesl's feelings. The man knew that Recess and Pharaoh were free siblings. The boy's mother, Queen Liesl, was related to Norris. A secret agreement said the princess would marry Magnolia, so Recess would be the only royal child left in Renelute. Norris seized the chance and whispered that King Elias loved only Lady Eltia, that she was to blame for Farah not seeing her brother, and that His Majesty visited Queen Liza only occasionally. Races began to notice his mother occasionally smiling sadly. Convinced the king had treated a woman unfairly, he vowed never to be like his father. Norris stepped forward and said he would always stand by his master's side. The man told the boy that following his advice would make him a good king and a good man. The advisor warned Ressus to be careful during the meeting. The boy said he already knew what to do and needed no reminder. Determined to protect his sister, Norris went outside afterward. A shadow slipped from a crack in the wall. The man asked it about the prince's mood and was told the boy trusted Norris completely, so there was no doubt he would become suspicious. The man told his assistant to alert him if anything happened. The shadow vanished. Norris was glad everything was going according to plan. While dressing, Farah said she felt uneasy. Asna told her the outfit suited the princess perfectly. The girl thanked her and wondered if her fiancé would like the clothes too. The bodyguard said the gentleman would like it. Nailing, she told the princess she looked especially beautiful today. A mother entered the room, saw that her daughter had finally put on the dress she had sent, and the girl thanked her for the gift. Asna watched the mother and daughter and admitted she would not call them family. The elf said Farah had no right to disgrace Renelute, even in front of the Marquis's son. She added that if the girl proved worthy, they might consider an alliance with the royal family. Farah said she understood. Her mother left the room and said she would go ahead. The girl sighed. Asna asked if the princess was all right. Farah said she was used to this kind of treatment. The bodyguard said the young man was a potential groom, so he should be fine. Farah said Asna was a kind girl and asked whether she knew anything about their guest. The bodyguard only knew his name and said the groom was Reed Baldia. The girl went to the window and repeated what Asna had said. Norris asked King Elias to let him take the lead in vetting the potential groom. Elias agreed, and Norris thanked His Majesty, and the king told him to proceed with caution and reminded him that their guest was a nobleman of the empire. Elias planned to marry the queen to a member of the imperial family. That would have given Renelute a real boost to its prosperity. The king muttered that no one had any hope for him anyway. Reed stood in front of the mirror studying his outfit. He wondered if he looked too odd. Diana asked how many times he'd checked his clothes that morning and compared him to a noblewoman going to see a prince. The knight told Reed he was very handsome, urged him to stand tall and be himself no matter his surroundings, and said clothes are only a shell and what matters is who wears them. Reed blushed as Diana stepped closer and touched his face, saying that if he were a girl he would be courted from all sides. Zack said they had to leave. Liner was already outside waiting. Reed called out that he was on his way. Walking down the stairs, the manager said he'd heard that Norris, an elderly dark elf and leader of the opposition, had fallen under Ressus's influence. Reed had not expected the man to get the information so quickly. The boy thanked him and asked what LTA thought. Zack guessed the woman wanted Farah to marry into the royal family. Her goals differed from Norris's. Zack didn't know her true motives. Reed thought it made sense that she was neutral toward him since she didn't know him. Raisis was his main problem. The hero knew that a prince under Norris's influence would be hostile. Reed asked Zack to see what he had to do to get Raisis to accept Farah's marriage. The hero wanted the prince's support. Raisis' heart once. The man said Norris literally blinded the dark elf. Zack said the prince was smart and truly cared about the country, but he accidentally came under the influence of an old elf, and Raisis' behavior contradicted the image of a prince, making him seem mentally unstable. Zack asked Reed to break this influence, adding that the hero could treat it as a request from the nobility who cared about Renelute's future and leave the rest to him. Reed hadn't expected to get a formal commission from the nobles after his simple question, and he saw it as his chance to make a name for himself. The boy promised he would do his best. Zack was grateful the hero agreed. Reed asked why Racer said he becomes so attached to Norris. The manager apologized and said he was not at liberty to discuss it. When Reed came outside, Liner frowned at his son for making excuses. The boy apologized, and he was going back to the mansion. Reed was surprised the elf wasn't coming with them. The man said he was eager to see how the elf would perform. The hero didn't quite understand what he meant. They rode by carriage to the palace to meet King Elias. Reed had expected a grand castle, but saw it was a strategic fort. On arrival, Strata asked if this was Marquis Liner Bardia. The man said he wanted an audience with His Majesty Elias. The guards said they had been expecting them and told them to leave their weapons. Liner announced that he, Reed, Diana, and Rubens would go to the king and ordered the others to wait for them outside. Security asked guests to remove their shoes before entering the building. Staff escorted guests to the door and told them they were expected. The door stood open. Guards in the royal family were behind them, confident. Everyone watched the new arrivals closely. Some felt suspicion, interest, distrust, or even curiosity. Liner called his son forward. They saw only one chair, and Norris explained they had received word that only the Marquis would attend the audience with the king, so a single chair had been prepared. When Liner asked Reed what he thought, Reed heard fury in his father's voice. The hero said he would simply stand beside Liner. Reed saw how Norris looked at him and realized the elf did not like him. The knights were furious, so the master told them to calm down. Liner sat in a chair and told his son to keep his head down until told, then to kneel and bow slightly, which Reed did. Everyone bowed. It was announced that Liner, Marquis of the Borderlands, had arrived from the Baldia domain of the Magnolia Empire. The doors opened, and the royal family stepped out. His Majesty ordered everyone to raise their heads. Elias Gredad Leonor apologized for the pomp of the occasion. The Marquis replied that it was perfectly natural for the princess's fiancé. The king asked if his son was standing next to Leonor. Reed introduced himself. Reed said he'd heard his father speak of Princess Farah and had come to greet the king. The boy was counting on the king's blessing. Elias realized Reed was Rysis's age and asked how old he was. The boy said he was 6. The king turns to his daughter and asks her to introduce herself. She said she was the princess of the kingdom of Renelute and the daughter of King Elias Farah, and she was so pleased to meet them that her ears trembled. Her mother scolded her, and she calmed down. Reed wondered what it meant. Lta Riverton, Farah's mother, introduced herself. Behind her stood Rhesus, the princess's brother, and his mother, Liesel. The king introduced himself and said he wanted to keep good relations with the lord. Reed was then asked how he felt about their proposal. The hero had not expected such a direct question. Racist couldn't resist telling his father he was being too playful and questioning why he would ask that of a child. Norris backed him up, and Reed realized the old elf didn't want the boy to make an impression. Reed decided to focus on the prince. The hero was about to do what Naris feared most. He declared that the alliance between Renelute and Houseball, the AM, must happen at any cost. Surprised courtiers fell silent, and the king asked for more. The hero said Renaissance and the Baldian lands shared a border, so stronger ties would deter neighboring states. Barelst was an example. The king said they were already free with their empire, and that should be enough, then added that he doubted they could trust Magnolia. Reed said that Barles probably saw the alliance with Magnolia as inefficient and thought marrying their neighbors in Baldia could bring major change. Baldia was a margraviate that could mobilize its own army independently when threatened. Under his wife's protection in the allied state after his marriage, he could act quickly without waiting for imperial orders. The nobles agreed. Reed said Baldia would mobilize its forces if Renelute were attacked. If Balls trusted the alliance, it would make their deterrence stronger. That was something no dynastic marriage with the imperial house could achieve. Racists said the Lord was talking nonsense. The Lord said they could act without marrying because they already had an alliance. Reed agreed and said he wanted to show how Barelst would take it. He noted the alliance would not allow Baldia to join immediately. The hero said troop deployments focused on defense. Barelst added that if the enemy attacked only their border, they could not act without official orders. Reed asked his father if he was right. Liner told the king to ignore the child's words and added that the effect of marriage on moderation could not be dismissed. His Majesty asked us to clarify whether they believe this will be mainly aimed at Barelst. Reed replied that there were other arguments, but he would discuss them after the marriage. Elias laughed and said the Margrave's son was very clever, adding that he would not sleep peacefully if the Lord were their enemy, and Norris reminded the king these were only the words of a child. The king noted that Liner approved and advised his son to broaden his horizons. Elias told the Margrave this was a reasonable and practical argument. Norris turned to the king and spoke. The king said words matter only when backed by strength and courage, and planned to rely on both sword and wit. Elias held out his hand and said he wanted to see the Lord's fighting skills. Reed stepped into the field as everyone waited for the fight. Reed couldn't see how a meeting with Princess Farah had become a duel at court. Diana handed the wooden sword to the master. The boy thanked her. The girl assumed someone had wanted to disgrace Reed, which explained why the equipment was so poorly prepared and that she had personally selected his weapons. The hero was surprised the girl even bothered, and Diana told the master not to spare anyone who was rude. Warming up, Reed noticed the royal family arguing, which explained why the duel had not started. The king apologized and told Reed they had to urgently change his opponent. The man said his son Riesis would now fight him. Renelute. Reed could hardly believe he had to fight the prince. Lubens and Diana clenched their fists and wished their master luck. The hero remembered Zach's instruction to break Rhys's heart first, a request from the nobles who cared about Renelute's future, and Reed realized Zach had known all along. The dark elf asked why the boy was grinning. The hero said he just remembered something funny. Rhesus muttered that he no longer liked his opponent. The king declared the duel between Mr. Reed and his son would begin, with simple rules. The fight would end if one surrendered or if they could not continue. Raising his hand, the hero offered one suggestion before the battle began and asked that His Majesty Elias be the only one to decide when it should end. Reed saw this was an important duel and did not want anyone to interfere. Norris watched him and found the boy's behavior insolent. The king accepted the condition. Rhys said with a smile that the hero had already lost the moment. He set foot on their territory and advised him to return to Magnolia. Reed understood the princess's feelings about his domain, but chose not to reply to the child's words. Rhys remembered that his opponent's mother was gravely ill and wondered how the son of an ailing mother could fight. The dark elf said Reed would be better off staying near his mother. The hero forced himself not to react to the provocation. At the Baldia estate, he refused to forgive Rhys for his words about his mother fighting for her life. The dark elf asked if the boy had anything to say, and the hero understood that Norris had provoked the prince. The duel began. Norris hoped a naive pause would work. The prince said that if Reed surrendered now, they would spare him unnecessary pain. The hero told the elf not to trouble himself and questioned whether his strength was only in words. Racist bristled and reminded him he had treated the human well. He noticed that the prince's kindness to him was only in words. Ressus lifted his wooden sword and ran toward his opponent. As the prince drew close to the hero, he grabbed the man's robe and slung him over his shoulder, leaving everyone taken aback. Reed pressed his sword to the prince's throat and asked if they were finished, angering the elf, who warned him not to mock and then took a stance, vowing not to underestimate the human next time. Reed beckoned his opponent toward him. The prince grew angry and told him not to act like a hero. The boy noticed that the dark elf had not even landed a punch. Rises lunged at Reed, and the hero Reed blocked the strike with his sword. The elf said he would win if they crossed swords. The boy knew the prince planned to overpower him by force. Rill threw the sword back, making Rhys, who had been pressing hard against it, lose his footing and fall to the ground, and the sword fell from the elf's hands. The hero pressed his weapon to his opponent's throat and said the prince's words did not match his actions. The spectators could not understand what it meant. The knights were happy for their master. Rhys wanted to speak but could not. Reed wanted the prince to see the vast gap between them, so he told the elf to stand and reminded him he was the prince of Renelute. Reed said Ressus wouldn't lose to the son of a sick mother, reminding Ressus that Reed had fitted him with a fake wooden sword and had donned the armor and uniform himself. The hero said the elf had no shame. Shouting for the prince to rise, he declared he would never forgive him otherwise. Ressus remained silent. The hero wanted to crush his pride. Seeing the elf refuse to rise, Reel said that if the boy would not fight, he should simply admit defeat. The hero added that in that case, resist would be a pathetic, weak-willed coward. The lord admitted he saw a wise king in the prince, like his father Elias. The elf rose and took up his sword. Shouting at Reed's back, the hero insisted he would definitely defeat him. When the hero looked at the prince, he saw the prince's gaze change. The prince said he accepted the challenge. The fight continued as Rises attacked, and Reed defended with his sword, dodging and knocking the prince off his feet, and the prince fell before getting up. Watching the duel, Farah could not believe her brother could not stand up to Reed, and she wanted to know what kind of training made someone so strong. Racist fell again. His sister didn't understand why he kept fighting when he could have stopped it at any time. Asna assumed Reed wasn't interested in either victory or defeat. The princess asked what Asna meant. The girl explained that the master's aim was to show his skill, so he couldn't risk doing it intentionally. The boy had no intention of brutally defeating the prince. Reed had no choice but to force Rhys into admitting defeat or wait for His Majesty's decision. They were relieved to hear Reed hadn't acted out of malice, since Ness said he was probably trying to teach the princess's brother a lesson, and the bodyguard saw Norris leave abruptly. Farah asked the girl what was wrong, and Nis said the noble family had been acting suspiciously lately, so she planned to follow them. Redu had lost count of how many times the prince dropped his sword during the duel. Tensions rose as Rises refused to retreat despite falling again and again. The king made no move to intervene, and the hero asked again if the elf would accept defeat. Rhys raised his sword and called the man a monster. Reed blocked the blow with his own weapon and told the prince the man was most likely a demon. The hero threw the elf over his shoulder. When Ressus refused to give in, Reed tried a different approach and asked the prince whether his words about the hero's mother were his own idea or suggested by someone else. Reed demanded an answer and asked whether Norris had put him up to it. The prince said nothing, but the hero understood everything from the prince's expression. The hero told the races to give up now, warning that otherwise everything would end badly. The prince shouted he would never do that. Reed's side suddenly grasped his hand and said he had lost the duel to Ressus, who lay on the ground, surprising the prince. When the duel ended, everyone gathered in the meeting room. Elias asked why Reed had admitted defeat. Reed said the king already knew the answer. The man realized Rhys's had suffered a complete defeat and knew his son had fought with honor, but the boy's stubbornness kept him from accepting it. The king asked whether his opponent wanted him to admit defeat. Rhys said his father was right, admitted he was fighting only out of pride, and felt Reed was fighting half-heartedly. Elias, however, believed his son was smarter. Lisa backed Elias, reminding him that Rhys had said before the battle that he wanted to fight. Reed realized this was what the queen had argued with the king about before the battle. His Majesty asked why the Lord had joined the battle in that way, since he could easily have knocked out Rhys. The hero knew he would have to explain it to the king himself. Reed asked everyone to leave, including his father, because he wanted to go over the conversation privately with the royal family. Liner, seeing that his son had a plan, advised him to finish speaking. After everyone left, Elias asked why they had acted that way. Reed said that before the fight, Rhys had told him to return to Magnolia. For a prince of that country, especially at a diplomatic reception, this was a very careless act. Reed said that if that had been all it took, he could not ignore Rhys's next words. Liesel asked what else her son had said. Reed replied that the prince had called him the son of an ailing mother and described him as a gentleman who could not handle a sword. As a member of the Bardia family, the hero said those words were unforgivable and would not tolerate that treatment. The queen burst into tears. Elias asked her son if it was true. Rhys remained silent. The man said it was a disgrace. The king remembered teaching the prince that everyone must answer for their words and actions, and added that Rhys had spoken with a nobleman from an allied state who was also his sister's fiancé. The man asked how his son could say such things. Reed decided clearing the hall was pointless. Rhys remained silent. Elias stood, took the sword, and said he had no use for a son who could not even answer him. Rhys apologized, and his father asked why he had acted so foolishly. The prince said marrying his younger sister to a common nobleman would be unwise, and that she should marry into the imperial family to secure Renelute's future. Elias realized his son was under Norris's influence, and explained that Rassis intended to send Farah to a den of intrigue far worse than Renelute, a place where she would be reduced to a mere flunky. Realizing his mistake, the boy began to shake. He believed marrying into the empire would bring the pharaoh happiness. The king told the prince not to repeat words he had heard from someone else. Rhys cried and screamed, then finally realized his mistake, and after calming down, the elf turned to Lord Reed and knelt before him. Bowing low before the hero, he acknowledged his mistake. Ressus admitted he had let others' words influence him and had said something he had no right to. The principal became energized. Reed said that it was no longer necessary. Elias reminded others that his apology alone was not enough. Elias also had to apologize on behalf of the state. Races said he understood. The prince told Reed he was sure his master could make his sister happy, and the boy asked him to take care of the girl. When the king raised his sword, Rhys apologized to his father for the trouble he had caused. The queen rushed to stop her husband, and Reed, however, compared the situation to historical dramas and thought it was about to be complete seppuku. Liesel clutched her husband's leg and pleaded for mercy for the child, who had only stumbled. Rhys insisted he should be punished for what he had done. The prince said he had one final request, that the king care for his mother and love her as much as the prince loved Lady Eltia. Elias said he had never once favored any of his beloved wives and explained his son had simply been manipulated. Reed saw the king about to strike Rhys with his sword and tried to stop him. Reed protected Races from the sword, determined to establish the king. The boy said he did not want that punishment for his opponent in battle. The hero explained the Or had fought the principal only to make him repent, and reminded him that he and his sister were going to be married, so he would not want to lose Rhys over something like that. Reed said only those in the room knew, so he asked his father to step out. The king paused to think. The hero noticed the man's doubts. The man said that in exchange for leaving everything unscathed, he had several requests and only asked that they listen and understand his decision. Elias sheathed his sword and told Reed to speak. Reed thought the king had been waiting for Liner's son to do so. Reed asked His Majesty to become a patron of Christie's Trading Company because new companies faced prejudice in Renero, and he wanted the king's support. Elias agreed and told Reed to bring a representative next time. The boy thanked him, and finally Reed could give Christie some good news. The second request was for Reed and Ferris's engagement to be recognized. His Majesty asked whether this price was acceptable. The hero replied that if the royal family approved, he would regard the marriage as sealed. Reed asked to speak privately with the king. Approaching His Majesty, he whispered in his ear. Elias had no objections and approved his daughter's marriage. He warned them to keep it quiet and asked that it not be announced. Reed said he would tell his father himself. The final condition was to spare Prince Ressus from punishment. When the king asked for the plan, Reed said he did not want to lose someone who could become like a brother to him and that the prince had fallen under a bad influence. The boy asked what the racist himself thought of this. The elf said he was deeply moved by the generous pardon and sincerely grateful. The prince promised to seize the opportunity. Now that the darkness had lifted, the king said his son would manage, declared the matter closed, and warned him not to tell anyone. Watching the hero shake Ilya's hand, Rices realized he could never match Lord Reed in wisdom, skill, or greatness as a man. After leaving the hall, the boy met his father and assumed that with the duel over, everything was finally settled. Farah and Asna were walking toward them, and Reed did not understand why she was there. The girls approached the lord, and the princess asked whether he would agree to be her bodyguard. Norris left the field during the fight between Reed and Ressus. He could not believe the prince, the elder and a skilled swordsman, was losing to the Margrave's son. Norris was sure everything would have worked out if the wooden sword had not hit the maid. When Diana saw the weapon, she asked if they thought it acceptable to show such disrespect to her master, and did not ask what the other person meant, since her accusations could also be seen as rude. The knight examined the wooden sword, then gripped it and snapped it in half, something the dark elf had not expected. The girl pointed out that even a weak soldier like her could easily break her weapon, and asked whether Norris considered such combat training an insult. Assuming it was a simple mistake, the man said he would bring another sword. Diana suggested he take her to the vault so she could choose the master's weapon herself. Annoyed by the interference, Norris went into the yard, approached the fence, and called his assistant to come out. A shadow appeared on the fence, and she asked why he had called her here. Norris apologized, said he was in a difficult situation, and asked if the shadow had any good advice. The assistant was surprised the elf couldn't do such an easy task, and suggested the man had overestimated Norris. The man protested, saying the Margrave's son was a monster. The shadow offered him some advice. She warned that the nobles, whether they supported the marriage or stayed neutral, would be displeased to see the prince beaten repeatedly, and since the king would not stop the fights, the prince would not surrender and would be tortured for much longer, and Shadow added that Norris should spread rumors after the duel. Fairy arrived to Reed and challenged Asna, her bodyguard. The king reminded his daughter that dueling at court was not a sport. The girl asked everyone to listen. She said evil rumors were spreading through the hall, and she wanted to dispel them with a new battle. His Majesty said he would tell her more. Farah said they had been tracking a nobleman but lost him along the way, and she and Asno overheard people saying the Margrave's son had been torturing the prince and taking cruel, merciless pleasure in it. Courtiers believed Reed was flaunting his power and would take the princess hostage after the marriage. The people wanted the princess to marry into the imperial family. Asna and Farah heard these rumors. The princess saw their opponents had already begun to act, and if things kept going the same way, they could eventually reach their goal. Asna reported Norris was at the forefront of the chaos, making it a grave situation for Queen Liesel and Ressus. The king said he understood and asked how the fight between Asna and Reed fit into the situation. Farah replied that they had planned it together. The princess wanted to call the nobles back to explain why the fight with the races dragged on and put the rumors to rest, and the bodyguard planned to reassure skeptics by staging a real duel, with Reed to prove the prince was not lying or exaggerating his strength. Farah said this would protect both their honors and spare anyone disgrace. Reed blamed the patron for arranging it all for them. The king, however, recognized his daughter's insight as her mother's. His Majesty considered it, then agreed to the princess's plan, and asked if Asna and Reed were on board with the idea, and they agreed. Ressus spoke first, admitting the battle had dragged on because of his stubbornness, and saying the lord was innocent, but the nobles were not entirely satisfied. Elias realized his son's performance had convinced no one, so he announced a second battle between Reed and Ferris's bodyguard, Asna. Norris was pleased with the choice, and sure the lord would be disgraced this time. The king ordered the combatants to prepare. Asna picked a wooden sword for herself. It was her chance to see Reed's strength up close. She had not been this eager for a duel in a long time. Norris entered the warehouse and greeted the bodyguard. As he moved to introduce himself, the woman cut him off and said she already knew him. Asna asked what he was doing there. The old elf told the girl he had a proposition and wanted her help, and Asna realized Norris had come to lure her to his side, so she asked what he wanted, and the man said his bodyguard should beat Reed and force him to abandon the marriage. Asna wanted to ignore him, but Norris said he was friends with her brothers and could arrange a reconciliation to free her from service during the trial, allowing her to finally return to the landmark family. The bodyguard told the old elf firmly not to weaken himself. She did not regret the decision and would not accept his deal. Norris was not pleased. As Nell left, the man asked if she was willing to give up her life or never return, and the girl pressed her sword to Norris's throat, said she was proud to serve the princess, and warned that any more words would be an insult to Farah. Norris left the warehouse clearly upset. On the battlefield, Asna smiled and said she'd be glad to see them duel. Reed felt the same.